Hello, and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist. Wherever you are in the world, I'm so glad you found your way here. This little pocket of quiet was made specially for you, a calm place to drift towards rest while still letting curiosity wander. Tonight, we're going to step gently into one of Earth's strangest chapters, one filled with giants that lived millions of years after the dinosaurs in a time closer to when our ancestors walked the earth. It was a time when land bridges connected continents, allowing herds and hunters to cross vast distances, weaving the world together in ways we can barely imagine today. It was a world that looked familiar and yet utterly alien. This was the Pleistocene epoch, beginning 2.5 million years ago and lasting until just 11,700 years ago. An age where giants flourished. The colder climates, paradoxically, made room for life of staggering size. Nutrient rich grasses covered wide plains, feeding herds of colossal herbivores, and in turn sustaining the predators that shadowed them. To walk across those landscapes would have been to move among beings that seemed almost mythic, towering mammoths moving in herds across icy tundras, saber-toothed monsters waiting in the shadows, with fangs gleaming like ivory blades in the pale light, ground sloths, heavier than elephants, tearing down entire trees with claws curved like scythes, and Gigantopithecus, the largest ape to ever walk the earth, whose teeth are so big that one can sit across a human palm and still spill over the edges. These were not just animals existing within the environment, they were architects of it. They shaped forests, kept grasslands open, and stirred rivers with their migrations, bending whole landscapes beneath their weight. It was a planet where power seemed to flow naturally toward the large, where strength and size were rewarded, and where survival often meant not being smaller, but being greater. Yet here lies the paradox that still unsettles us. All of these giants, so perfectly adapted to their landscapes, thriving for millions of years, are gone. Their bones rest in tar pits and permafrost, in caves and riverbeds, but the thundering of their herds, the shadows of their forms, and the weight of their presence have all vanished. But why did so many vanish so suddenly after surviving ice and fire, hunger and flood for countless generations? And what does their silence tell us about the fragility of even the mightiest forms of life today? Tonight, we'll wander together into that vanished world. We'll meet the titans that ruled, from the towering mammoths and giant apes to the predators that matched them step for step. But before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Your comments are one of my favorite parts of this sleepy little community. If you're already enjoying this quiet space, it would mean so much if you tapped like or subscribed. And for those already subscribed, thank you for being part of this calm little corner of science. If you haven't yet, kindly tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next upload. I hope this story soothes your mind and carries you gently toward rest. Now take a deep breath, let your shoulders soften, and together let's step into the world of lost giants. In the shaded forests of ancient Asia, where bamboo grew in endless groves and sunlight filtered down through a green canopy, there once lived an ape so immense it seems almost unreal. Fossils tell us that this creature, called Gigantopithecus, could rise to nearly 10 feet in height. Its body may have weighed close to half a ton. To imagine such an animal is to imagine a primate that would have towered over every human and overshadowed even the largest gorillas alive today. What we know of this giant does not come from full skeletons, but from fragments. The story of Gigantopithecus begins with teeth, enormous molars with flat ground surfaces worn down from chewing. Alongside them are jawbones so massive that they can fill a human hand and still spill beyond its edges. These fragments were discovered in caves across China, Vietnam, and India, and though incomplete, they hint at a creature of staggering size. From those pieces, scientists have carefully rebuilt an image of the largest ape to ever walk the earth. The clues hidden in those teeth tell us about its diet. Gigantopithecus was a herbivore, relying heavily on bamboo. Its broad molars and deep jaws were built to crush and grind tough stalks, stripping away leaves and breaking down fibrous plants. It probably also ate fruits and other vegetation when available, but bamboo would have been its staple, much like it is for modern pandas. A grove of bamboo may have been both its shelter and its larder, providing cover in the dense forest and food enough to sustain such a heavy body. Bamboo, though plentiful, is not a stable food source. These plants grow quickly, but also die in cycles. Entire groves can collapse after flowering, leaving long barren stretches before new shoots rise again. For an animal as large as Gigantopithecus, dependent on eating vast amounts each day, such cycles would have been a challenge. During lean years, it may have had to wander farther, competing with other forest dwellers for limited food. Its immense size that once gave it strength also made it vulnerable to scarcity. The forests of Asia during the Pleistocene epoch were rich and varied. Elephants roamed among the trees, rhinoceroses trampled the undergrowth, and strange antelopes browsed the shrubs. In this crowded world, Gigantopithecus stood apart. Its bulk alone would have made it an imposing figure, a silent shadow moving through groves of green. Unlike predators with claws and fangs, it did not need speed or ferocity to command respect. Its size was its shield, a presence that shaped the forest simply by existing within it. Though no one has ever seen this ape alive, it is not hard to imagine the impression it must have made. Picture walking through a bamboo grove, hearing the hollow creak of stalks bending and breaking, only to glimpse a vast figure moving just out of sight. Shoulders as wide as a doorway, arms long enough to sweep branches aside, a head rising above the thickets. To encounter such a being would have been to see both familiarity and strangeness woven together. A face with the features of a primate, yet set on a body larger than one could believe. Gigantopithecus lived alongside many other great animals of the Ice Age, but its fate was sealed by the fragility of its chosen food. As the world shifted between cold and warm cycles, forests retreated in places and grasslands spread. The groves of bamboo that once covered much of Asia grew patchier, leaving less to sustain the giant apes. With each passing cycle, their world narrowed. For creatures so specialized, survival depended on stability, and when that stability was broken, their numbers dwindled. The exact moment of their disappearance is uncertain, but evidence suggests they were gone by around 300,000 years ago. They had endured for perhaps 2 million years, towering among the forests, yet their end came when the environment could no longer support them. Their extinction leaves behind a silence where there was once power and motion. What remains are the teeth and jaws, locked away in stone and dust, yet still carrying the memory of a creature unlike any other. To hold one of those teeth is to hold a fragment of a giant, a relic of a time when the forests of Asia sheltered beings that blur the line between myth and reality. Some legends in the region tell of great hairy figures in the mountains, wild men that lurked at the edges of human settlements. It is tempting to wonder if such stories are faint echoes of ancient encounters, passed down through generations long after the last Gigantopithecus fell silent. Their story is a reminder of how delicate the balance of life can be. Gigantopithecus seemed invincible in size and strength, yet it was tied too closely to a single resource. When the forests changed, the giant apes could not change with them. Their bones whisper that being the biggest is no guarantee of survival, and that even the largest figures in nature's grand pageant can vanish when the world around them shifts. In the wide open landscapes of ancient South America, long before lions or jaguars ever prowled its forests, another kind of hunter ruled. It was a bird, though not like any bird alive today. Imagine a creature nearly 10 feet tall, its head rising above the height of a grown person on horseback, its body too heavy for flight, but its legs built like pistons made for running. These were the terror birds, creatures whose very name hints at the fear they must have inspired. Known to science as forest racids, the terror birds were apex predators in their time. Their wings had shrunk until they were useless for flight, but their legs were long and muscular, carrying them across plains at speeds that would have left most prey with little chance of escape. Their stride was swift and powerful, each step closing the distance with terrifying speed. It was not their size alone that made them rulers of the land, but the weapon they carried at the front of their skull. Their beak, large and curved, was shaped like a heavy axe. One downward strike could crush bone, slice through flesh, and disable an animal in an instant. The world they inhabited was a land of giants in its own right. South America, for much of its history, was an island continent, cut off from the north by oceans. This isolation gave rise to unique animals found nowhere else. Armadillo relatives grew to the size of small cars, sloths became as large as elephants, and without big cats or wolves to compete with them, the terror birds filled the role of top predator. On the grassy plains and in the scrublands, they hunted mammals, reptiles, and perhaps even other birds. The land echoed not with the roar of a lion, but with the pounding of taloned feet and the strike of a hatchet shaped beak. Fossil evidence tells us there were many kinds of terror birds. Some species were smaller, perhaps no taller than a person, built for agility and speed. Others towered above, with skulls over 2 feet long, heavy enough to deliver crushing blows. Their bones have been found in Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, scattered across layers of rock that capture the story of millions of years. Each species carved out its own place in the ecosystem, but all shared the same predatory design, a body turned into a living weapon. The way they hunted is still pieced together from clues, but the image is clear enough to inspire awe. Imagine a grazing mammal in the open plain, perhaps something resembling a large deer or a small camel. It lifts its head at the sound of pounding footsteps, but the terror bird is already upon it, its beak swinging downward in a strike that can shatter bone. The prey collapses, stunned or broken, and the bird tears into the flesh with shearing power. Unlike cats that rely on claws, or wolves that tear with packs of teeth, this predator's weapon was a single devastating tool, perfected over millions of years. The arrival of the terror birds in North America adds another layer to their story. When the continents finally joined by the Isthmus of Panama a few million years ago, animals crossed in both directions. Mammals like saber-toothed cats, horses, and camels moved south, while terror birds strode northward. Fossils of one species, Titanus walleri, have been found in Florida and Texas, evidence that for a time these great hunters expanded their reach into new lands. Yet this migration marked the beginning of their decline. The new predators that entered South America brought competition the terror birds had never faced. Big cats, with their stealth and agility, hunted differently. They struck from the shadows and killed with precise bites. Over time, the balance shifted. Where once the birds ruled unchallenged, now they had rivals that could outcompete them in certain environments. Fossil timelines show that the reign of the terror birds slowly faded, their numbers dwindling as mammals took over the role of dominant predators. Yet even in extinction, their image lingers. Their skulls, preserved in stone, reveal the sheer scale of their power. The beak curves downward like a blade forged by nature, heavy and sharp. To stand before such a fossil is to imagine the towering figure that once moved across the plains, feathers bristling in the wind, eyes fixed on the movements of prey. They may no longer thunder across South America, but their bones tell of a time when birds, not mammals, were the most fearsome hunters on land. Their story is a reminder of evolution's unpredictability. That a bird, a creature we so often associate with flight and song, could grow into a giant land predator is one of the most astonishing twists in natural history. And for millions of years, they succeeded, shaping the world around them with the weight of their presence and the terror of their beaks. In the heart of Ice Age Australia, where the land was vast and dry, and forests gave way to open plains, there moved a predator unlike any other. It was not a cat with gleaming teeth, nor a bird with axe-shaped beak. It was a reptile, a giant lizard longer than a bus, heavy as a small car, its tongue flickering to test the air. This was Megalania, the great dragon of Australia, a cousin of the Komodo dragon that still prowls the islands of Indonesia, but far larger, far more formidable. Estimates suggest that Megalania may have stretched over 20 feet from snout to tail, making it the largest terrestrial lizard known to have ever lived. Its body was thick and muscular, armored in scales that shimmered like plates of burnished stone. Each limb ended in long claws capable of tearing through flesh, and its skull housed rows of sharp serrated teeth that curved backward, trapping anything unfortunate enough to be caught in its bite. To encounter it in the scrublands of Australia would have been to stand before a living dragon, silent and patient until the moment of attack. What made this reptile even more extraordinary was the suspicion that, like its smaller relatives alive today, Megalania may have possessed venom. Modern Komodo dragons secrete toxins that prevent blood from clotting, so that wounds they inflict bleed endlessly, weakening their prey long after the initial strike. Some paleontologists believe Megalania carried the same deadly secret. Its teeth, grooved and sharp, could have delivered a slow-working poison that turned even a shallow bite into a fatal injury. A wound that did not heal, a weakening that stretched over hours or days, may have been one of its hunting strategies. If true, then Megalania was not only immense in size, but also one of the first truly venomous giant predators on land. The animals it hunted were as formidable as the predator itself. The Australian outback of the Pleistocene was not empty desert, but a mosaic of woodlands, grasslands, and rivers. Here grazed marsupial giants, massive kangaroos that stood taller than men, wombat relatives the size of rhinoceroses, and slow-moving browsers that dwarfed the animals of today. These herbivores would have been prime targets for Megalania. It did not need to chase with the speed of a wolf or leap like a lion. Instead, it could wait, conserving its energy until a careless creature wandered too close. Then, with a sudden burst of motion, the giant lizard would lunge, jaws snapping shut with crushing force, claws raking across flesh. Even if the prey managed to escape the initial strike, venom and blood loss may have done the rest. The presence of Megalania must have shaped the behavior of everything around it. Smaller predators would have kept their distance, wary of approaching a carcass that the giant lizard claimed. Herbivores would have learned to scan not only for movement in the grasses, but also for stillness, for the outline of a log that was not a log at all, but a body coiled and waiting. It was a predator that dominated not by speed, but by sheer size, patience, and a hunting method that turned time itself into a weapon. The fossils that tell its story are fragmentary, scattered across caves and ancient riverbeds, vertebrae as thick as a human fist, pieces of jaw studded with teeth, fragments of limb bones that speak of immense strength. Yet even from these incomplete remains, the scale of Megalania becomes clear. It was an animal that pushed the limits of what a reptile could become, a reminder that dragons, in their own way, once walked the earth. Its disappearance remains wrapped in mystery. Like many of the Ice Age giants, Megalania seems to have vanished as climate shifted. Australia grew warmer and drier, and many of the large marsupial herbivores that formed its prey base dwindled. A predator so immense, requiring such vast amounts of food, could not easily adapt when those giants disappeared. Without enough large animals to sustain it, the dragon of Australia faded from the land. Still, the silence it left is powerful. To imagine the Australian outback with Megalania still present is to picture a world with a shadow always at its edges, a sense that in every clearing, behind every tree, something enormous might be watching, its tongue flickering, its body unmoving until the moment it chose to strike. The thought of a lizard 20 feet long, waiting in the heat of the day, lingers like a half remembered dream, a story of what once was and never will be again. Across the wide open plains of Ice Age North America, where winds swept across grasslands that seemed to stretch without end, there moved a shadow of staggering size. It was not a lion crouching in the grass or a wolf coursing after bison. This was a bear, but not like the bears we know today. Standing upright, it could reach 12 feet high, tall enough to look through a second-story window. Its name was Arctodus, the short-faced bear, and it carried both bulk and speed in a combination that made it one of the most fearsome land predators of its age. Most modern bears are built for power, their bodies broad and heavy, with strong shoulders and thick frames suited for climbing, digging, and short bursts of strength. Arctodus was different. Its limbs were unusually long, especially the legs, and its build was tall and narrow compared to its living relatives. This strange proportion gave it a gait more like that of a wolf than a bear. With each stride, it could cover great distances quickly, striding across open plains with surprising efficiency. Fossil reconstructions suggest it was built to move fast, a sprinter with the stamina to range far in search of food. For a creature that could weigh over 1,000 pounds, this swiftness was astonishing. Its head, broad and powerful, was matched with jaws capable of crushing bone. Teeth thick and heavy reveal a diet that may not have relied solely on fresh kills. Arctodus may have fed as much on carrion as it did on living prey. With its immense size, it could easily displace other predators from their kills. Packs of dire wolves or even saber-toothed cats would have had little choice but to retreat when the looming silhouette of the giant bear appeared. Few animals on the plains could challenge a predator that combined sheer size with bone-crushing bite force. But there is also evidence that Arctodus hunted actively. Its long legs, strange for a bear, hint at an ability to chase down grazing animals. Horses, camels, and giant bison roamed the North American steppes in vast herds, and Arctodus may have singled out weaker members, pursuing them across the open ground. Though not as fast as a cat in a sprint, its endurance and intimidating presence may have been enough to bring down prey or exhaust them into collapse. Whether hunter or scavenger, Arctodus sat firmly at the top of its world's food chain. Its range was immense, stretching from Alaska and the Arctic Circle down into the central plains of North America and even into parts of Mexico. Fossils of Arctodus have been uncovered across this vast territory, suggesting that it roamed widely, perhaps following the migrations of the large herbivores that filled the Ice Age landscape. To imagine a grassland dotted with mammoths, mastodons, and camels is also to imagine that somewhere within that same horizon, a giant bear was moving quietly, covering miles with a steady, loping gait. Its keen sense of smell guiding it to opportunity. Its dominance, however, was tied to the abundance of the great herds. The Ice Age steppes were rich with plant life that nourished massive grazers, and those grazers in turn supported predators like Arctodus. But when the climate shifted at the end of the Pleistocene, Grasslands gave way to encroaching forests in many regions. The herds of horses and camels began to dwindle. The great bison were reduced in number, and as the prey base shrank, a predator as specialized and immense as Arctodus faced mounting pressures. A giant body requires giant amounts of food, and when the supply faltered, survival became more difficult with each passing generation. What remains of Arctodus today are bones that speak of scale and proportion, leg bones that seem too long for a bear, skulls with wide jaws, teeth worn from grinding through carcasses. These fossils tell of a predator that did not resemble the image we hold of modern bears, but something stranger, something more finely tuned to the wide open landscapes of its time. It was both ruler and scavenger, sprinter and giant, a predator that pressed against the limits of what nature could shape from the bear lineage. To picture Arctodus on the plains is to sense a mixture of awe and unease. Imagine a shadow rising above the grass, striding forward with a pace that carried both weight and speed, its nostrils catching the scent of prey miles away. Imagine dire wolves scattering from a carcass, their snarls silenced by the approach of a beast that could kill them with a single blow. This was the world of the sprinting giant bear, a reminder that size and power, even when paired with speed, are not guarantees of survival. Across the wind-swept plains of the Ice Age, where herds of bison, horses, and mammoths moved in endless migrations, there prowled a predator that was both familiar and alien. It looked like a cat, but its body carried the stamp of a very different design. Its fangs, curved but shorter than those of its saber-toothed cousin Smilodon, were edged like knives, serrated for slicing flesh. This was Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat, an apex hunter that once ranged from the tundras of Europe to the prairies of North America. While Smilodon waited in cover for sudden ambush, Homotherium was built for something else. Its legs were long, especially the front limbs, giving it a slightly sloping back, as though its body leaned forward with momentum. This strange posture, combined with a lighter build, suggests a predator adapted for speed and stamina. Homotherium was made for open ground, for chasing and striking among the herds that stretched across the plains. Its fangs, though not as dramatic as Smilodon's long sabers, were edged with fine serrations, blades designed to cut quickly through hide and muscle. In a world where prey lived in herds and danger was out in the open, efficiency mattered more than spectacle. Its head carried other differences as well. The jaws of Homotherium could open wide, but not as wide as those of Smilodon. Instead of relying on one great stab with elongated teeth, the scimitar cat struck with repeated, powerful bites, its serrated canines tearing cleanly. Its front limbs were strong, tipped with sharp claws that helped it grip and pull down struggling prey. To imagine a herd of horses running across a frozen plain is to imagine Homotherium slipping among them, singling out the weak or the slow, and dragging them down with slashing precision. Fossil evidence tells us that this cat was not limited to one corner of the Ice Age world. Remains have been found across Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America, showing that Homotherium was one of the most widely distributed big cats of prehistory. It was adaptable, thriving in tundra, steppe, and savanna, wherever large herbivores moved. This wide range hints at its success as a predator, able to adjust to different environments while maintaining its role at the top of the food chain. Some discoveries even suggest that Homotherium may have hunted cooperatively. In caves where bones have been found, multiple individuals appear together, raising the possibility of group living. If true, it would mean that these cats worked in coordinated efforts, much like lions do today, though their methods would have been shaped by the open landscapes and the giant prey they pursued. The thought of serrated fanged cats moving in groups across the plains is a chilling one, a reminder that power in numbers belongs not only to wolves and hyenas. Homotherium's presence stretched for millions of years, its lineage long and successful. It coexisted with other predators, sometimes sharing ground with Smilodon in the Americas or with cave lions in Eurasia. Each held its own strategy, avoiding direct competition by specializing in different ways. Where Smilodon ruled forests and thickets, Homotherium thrived in open ground, chasing herds where there was nowhere to hide. This division of labor among predators kept balance in ecosystems that might otherwise have tipped into chaos. Yet even such a successful design could not withstand the shifts at the end of the Pleistocene. As climates warmed and ice retreated, grasslands shrank. Herds that once filled entire horizons dwindled, breaking into smaller groups or vanishing altogether. The scimitar-toothed cat, so finely tuned to the rhythm of great herds, found itself without the prey it depended upon. Fossil records show that Homotherium faded away roughly 10,000 years ago, part of the same wave of extinctions that claimed many other Ice Age giants. What lingers of them today are their bones, their serrated teeth still sharp after hundreds of thousands of years in the earth. Skulls reconstructed in museums reveal the strange proportions of their bodies, sloping backs and forward-leaning frames that hint at the speed of pursuit. They whisper of a world where predators moved like shadows across frozen steppes, keeping pace with the endless march of grazing giants. Homotherium was not as famous as Smilodon, nor as spectacular in appearance, but in its design there was something equally remarkable, a predator crafted by evolution to thrive in open plains, to chase where others ambushed, and to cut with serrated blades of ivory. Its story is one of balance between form and function, a balance that held for millions of years before finally being broken by changes far beyond its control. Across the ancient woodlands and plains of Australia, long before lions padded across Africa or tigers stalked Asian jungles, there lived a predator shaped by a completely different lineage. It was not a cat at all, though it has come to be called the marsupial lion. In truth, it was a member of the marsupial family, closer in ancestry to wombats and kangaroos than to any feline. Yet in its body, nature had sculpted a hunter of remarkable power, with tools so strange that scientists still marvel at them today. This was Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion of Ice Age Australia, one of the most specialized predators the continent ever produced. Its body was about the size of a modern leopard, though stockier, with broad shoulders and strong limbs. What set it apart were the jaws and teeth, unlike those of any other mammal. Instead of long canines like those of saber-toothed cats, Thylacoleo's front teeth were reduced, while its cheek teeth had evolved into slicing blades. Each tooth closed against its partner like the blades of scissors, shearing through flesh and bone with astonishing precision. This adaptation made its bite force legendary. Relative to its size, Thylacoleo's bite was stronger than that of modern lions and tigers, an almost paradoxical power packed into such a compact predator. Its skull carried other signs of specialization. The jaw muscles were anchored to ridges of bone that gave them leverage, turning the act of biting into a crushing, cutting motion. When this animal closed its mouth around prey, the scissor-like teeth could slice through hide and muscle with ease, leaving little chance for escape. It was not only about strength but efficiency, a predator designed to end hunts quickly. The claws added another dimension to its arsenal. Each forelimb bore large, retractable claws, curved like hooks, ready to grip and hold struggling prey. More unusually, Thylacoleo had semi-opposable thumbs, each tipped with an enlarged claw. This gave it a grip unlike that of most other predators, almost like a hand that could grasp and anchor its victim while the jaws did their work. Some fossil evidence even suggests that these claws left marks on cave walls, hinting that the marsupial lion may have been an agile climber. With such an ability, it could have scaled rocky cliffs or ambushed prey from low trees, descending with sudden, devastating precision. The prey that filled its world was equally impressive. During the Pleistocene, Australia was home to giant versions of animals we recognize today. There were kangaroos that stood taller than a man, some weighing hundreds of kilograms. There were massive browsing wombat relatives called diprotodons, larger than small cars, grazing across open plains. These giant herbivores would have been prime targets for Thylacoleo, which had the tools to bring them down despite the size difference. With claws to secure its hold and scissor-like teeth to cut deep, even the largest marsupial giants were vulnerable to its strikes. The landscape it ruled was one of contrasts. Much of Ice Age Australia was dry, with scrublands, forests, and grasslands spreading under a sun that often brought long droughts. Animals clustered near rivers and water holes, and it was here, perhaps, that Thylacoleo's shadow would fall most often. A sudden movement in the brush, a leap from a rocky ledge, a blur of claws and bone-cutting teeth in these moments, survival balanced on the edge of silence and speed. What makes Thylacoleo so fascinating is that it shows how evolution can take unexpected paths. Unlike placental carnivores such as cats, which honed their fangs and claws along one trajectory, marsupials experimented differently. From herbivorous ancestors, this lineage diverged into a predator armed with scissors for teeth and hands for claws, unlike anything seen elsewhere on Earth. It is a reminder that the rules of survival can be written in many different ways, and that nature often finds surprising solutions to the same challenges. But even the best adapted predators cannot escape the changes of their world. As the Pleistocene drew to a close, Australia's great herbivores began to dwindle. Climate shifts altered vegetation, reducing the abundance of large browsing animals. With fewer giant kangaroos and diprotodons roaming the plains, the specialized marsupial lion lost the prey it depended upon. Fossil evidence shows that by around 46,000 years ago, this predator had disappeared, leaving behind only bones and claw marks scratched into cave stone. In museums today, its skulls reveal the strange scissor teeth, and its reconstructed skeletons lean forward as though still poised for the chase. The marsupial lion does not roar in memory the way a saber-tooth might, yet its uniqueness whispers of a different path that evolution once explored in a land apart from the rest of the world. Across the frozen steppes of Eurasia, in lands where the winds carved long waves across endless plains of grass, there once moved a creature so striking that it has often been mistaken for myth. Tales of unicorns drift through human history, woven into folklore and stories of wonder, but behind those stories may lie the memory of a very real giant. It was not a delicate horse with a spiraled horn of legend, but a massive, shaggy beast more closely related to the rhinoceros. This animal was Elasmotherium, sometimes called the Siberian unicorn, a woolly giant whose single horn may have towered like a spear above its head. Unlike the unicorns of fairy tales, Elasmotherium was built for survival in some of the harshest conditions the Ice Age could offer. Its body was large and powerful, often weighing several tons, with thick legs that carried it across open grasslands. Fossil evidence suggests it stood taller than modern rhinoceroses, perhaps nearly as tall as an elephant's shoulder. Its massive skull was crowned with a bony base, an anchor for the immense horn that rose from its forehead. While no preserved horn has survived, the structure of its skull leaves little doubt that the horn was real. Some scientists believe it may have stretched over 3 feet long, making it one of the most imposing natural weapons of its age. The horn itself sparks questions about its purpose. Was it used in battle, as males competed for mates, or dominance over territory? Was it a tool for defense against the predators that stalked the plains? Or did it serve more peaceful functions, such as sweeping snow aside to uncover grasses hidden beneath the frost? Its exact role remains uncertain, but the sheer size of the horn suggests it was central to the life of the Siberian unicorn, shaping both its survival and its behavior. Elasmotherium lived across a wide range of Eurasia, from the rolling steppes of what is now Ukraine to the frozen edges of Siberia. These landscapes during the Pleistocene were colder than today, yet rich in life. Grasslands stretched in sweeping expanses, nourished by the cold, dry climate. Herds of herbivores, from steppe bison to woolly mammoths, grazed alongside Elasmotherium, each adapted in its own way to the rhythms of ice and thaw. Where mammoths grazed on coarse tundra grasses and giant deer fed on shrubs, Elasmotherium specialized in tough, fibrous plants. Its jaws and teeth were built to grind down roots and dry stems, an adaptation that allowed it to thrive in a land where food could be scarce in the long winters. Its body also carried clues to its resilience. The shape of its legs and the wear of its joints suggest that it was a walker of long distances, able to move across vast plains in search of food. Unlike some Ice Age animals that lingered in forests, this giant was tied to open spaces, following the grasses that were the foundation of its survival. Its thick coat would have protected it against bitter winds, while layers of muscle gave it both strength and endurance. One of the most remarkable aspects of Elasmotherium is how late it survived into the Ice Age. For many years, scientists believed it had vanished long before humans spread widely across Eurasia. Yet recent discoveries of fossils suggest that it lived as recently as 39,000 years ago, overlapping with the presence of modern humans in those regions. This means that our ancestors may have seen these animals firsthand, perhaps even inspiring the legends that later grew into myths of unicorns. To imagine a hunter on the cold steppe glimpsing a great shaggy beast with a horn rising like a lance is to glimpse how awe could turn into story. But even the strongest adaptations cannot always withstand the shifting of climate. As the Ice Age drew to its close, the vast grasslands of Eurasia began to shrink. Forests spread where plains had been, and wetlands replaced dry steppes. The specialized grazers that depended on those open expanses began to struggle, and Elasmotherium was among them. With its heavy body and specialized diet, it may not have been able to adapt to changing food sources. Habitat collapse gradually pushed it toward extinction. The fossilized bones that remain tell us of its size, its strength, and the horn that once made it one of the most unforgettable figures of the Ice Age. Yet the silence it left behind is perhaps even more powerful. The Siberian unicorn was real, not a creature of fantasy but of Earth's own imagination, shaped by ice, grass, and time. Its absence reminds us that even the most extraordinary beings can vanish when their world shifts around them. Across the open plains and deserts of Ice Age North America, long-legged shapes once moved in steady lines across the horizon. At first glance, they would seem strangely familiar to us, their outlines resembling the camels of Arabia or the dromedaries that carry caravans through the deserts of Africa today. Yet these were not animals of distant lands. They were camels, native to North America itself, the birthplace of their lineage, and among them walked Camelops, a giant now lost to time. Camelops stood taller and carried more weight than most of its modern cousins. Fossil evidence suggests it could reach a height of nearly 7 feet at the shoulder, with long necks stretching higher still, and a body mass of close to 1,000 pounds. Its build was sturdy and powerful, more robust than today's slender camels, giving it the endurance to travel across vast distances and the strength to withstand the harsh conditions of the Pleistocene. The image of these giants moving across grassy plains or dry basins is a reminder that camels, so tied in our imagination to deserts half a world away, were once truly North American creatures. The adaptations of camelops were finely tuned to the landscapes it roamed. The Ice Age climate swung between extremes, yet large parts of North America were open plains dotted with scrub, sage, and dry grasses. Camelops had the long legs and efficient stride needed to cover miles in search of food and water. Its teeth, worn flat with ridges, were suited for grinding coarse vegetation, from grasses to shrubs. Like modern camels, it could endure stretches without water, storing fat reserves to sustain itself when resources were scarce. The deserts and prairies of North America were unpredictable, but Camelops was built for resilience. What makes these giants particularly fascinating is their range. Fossils of camelops have been discovered from Alaska in the far north to Mexico in the south, showing how adaptable they were to different climates and ecosystems. They grazed across the dry basins of what is now Nevada, wandered the wide river valleys of the Midwest, and even reached the forests that edged the Pacific coast. Such a wide distribution points to their success as a species, thriving for hundreds of thousands of years across diverse environments. Their presence would have been unmistakable. Imagine the sight of herds moving slowly across a Pleistocene plain, long necks rising above the grasses, each animal casting a tall shadow in the low light of evening. Predators such as dire wolves or American lions may have stalked them, but a full-grown camelops was formidable, with sharp kicks and the strength of size to defend itself. Herd behavior likely gave them added protection, many eyes and ears watching for danger as they grazed and moved together across the land. Camelops also carried hints of the modern camels we know. They likely had humps of fat, though their exact shape is uncertain since such tissues do not fossilize. Their broad, padded feet suggest they were well suited for soft or shifting ground, just as today's camels walk across sand without sinking. The connection between these North American giants and the camels of today lies in migration. Around 3 to 5 million years ago, ancestors of camelops crossed the Bering Land Bridge into Asia, spreading into new continents and eventually giving rise to the dromedaries and Bactrian camels of the Old World. Llamas, alpacas, vicuñas, and guanacos are also descendants of North American camels, a living legacy of a family that once dominated an entire continent. Yet camelops itself did not survive. As the Pleistocene drew to a close, climates shifted dramatically. The wide, open grasslands that had sustained large grazers began to shrink. Forests expanded in some regions, while deserts grew harsher in others. Food sources dwindled, and with them, the great herds that had once stretched for miles. A giant that required such vast resources could not adapt quickly enough to the rapid changes. Within a few thousand years, camelops vanished, leaving behind only the bones that now rest in riverbeds, caves, and the dry soils of the American West. To think of camels today is to think of deserts on the other side of the world. Yet their true story begins here in North America, where camelops walked tall across plains of ice and dust long before deserts like the Sahara ever carried their kin. Their disappearance left the continent without one of its most enduring giants, a silence where once herds moved in steady rhythm beneath the endless sky. In the cool forests and grassy uplands of the Pleistocene, there wandered an elephant unlike any alive today. At first glance, it resembled the mammoths or mastodons that we know from Ice Age imagery, but on closer inspection, its most striking feature revealed itself. Tusks that grew in long, elegant spirals, curling outward in sweeping arcs. This was Cuvieronius, a member of the Gomphother family, one of the last of its line, and a reminder that elephant kin once came in forms far stranger than those we see now. Cuvieronius stood around the size of a modern African elephant, though often leaner, with long legs and a slightly narrower build that suited it for roaming upland terrain. Its tusks were the marvel that set it apart. Unlike the curved scythes of mammoths or the straighter blades of mastodons, these tusks twisted with a subtle spiral, growing outward in a graceful pattern that made them both beautiful and formidable. Each tusk could stretch several feet in length, and the spiraling ridges may have made them stronger against the stresses of pushing, lifting, or digging. The landscapes Cuvieronius inhabited were varied. Fossils show it ranged widely, from the southern parts of North America down into Central and South America, a vast spread that covered thousands of miles. In forested regions, it browsed on leaves, branches, and softer vegetation, plucking at shrubs with its trunk. In more open settings, it grazed on grasses and forbs, taking advantage of its flexible diet. This adaptability made it successful in a range of habitats, from woodlands to plains, and gave it a reach far beyond some of its elephant relatives. The Pleistocene was an age of giants, but it was also an age of shifting climates. Glaciers advanced and retreated, reshaping the world in cycles that could change environments within the span of a few generations. Cuvieronius, like other large herbivores, was not just a passenger in these landscapes but a shaper of them. As it moved through forests, breaking branches, and feeding on saplings, it created openings in the canopy. These gaps allowed sunlight to reach the ground, encouraging the growth of grasses and low plants. In this way, the spiral-tusked elephant influenced the very structure of the habitats it called home, leaving trails of altered forest behind it. Imagine the sight of a herd of these animals moving through a highland valley. Their large bodies made the earth tremble underfoot, trunks curling around foliage, tusks flashing pale in the filtered light of trees. Calves would have walked between their mother's legs, shielded by walls of muscle and ivory. Predators, even the largest cats of the age, would have thought carefully before approaching. Against a full-grown Cuvieronius, even a saber-toothed hunter would stand little chance. The spread of Cuvieronius into South America is part of a larger story known as the Great American Biotic Interchange. Around 3 million years ago, the land bridge of Panama rose from the sea, linking the two continents for the first time in millions of years. Herds of Gomphotheres, including Cuvieronius, crossed southward, entering new territories filled with unfamiliar plants and animals. They joined ground sloths, giant armadillo-like creatures, and other immigrants in reshaping the ecological web of South America. For a time, they thrived in these new lands, browsing in forests and wandering the mountain slopes of the Andes. But survival in the Pleistocene was never guaranteed. As the Ice Age neared its end, climates warmed, glaciers retreated, and habitats shifted once again. Forests shrank in some places, drying into open scrublands, while in others, wetlands receded. The broad-leaved plants that had sustained Cuvieronius became scarcer, forcing them into less favorable environments. Large animals, with their need for vast quantities of food and water, are always the first to feel the pressure when ecosystems change too quickly. Fossil evidence shows that Cuvier was among the last of the Gomphothers, surviving until only about 10,000 years ago. In geological terms, this is the blink of an eye, so recent that they would have still walked the earth as glaciers melted and new forests spread. Their tusks, with their graceful twists, were some of the last echoes of a family line that had once included many odd and remarkable species, from four-tusked forms to shovel-jawed grazers. When Cuvier disappeared, it marked the end of its branch of the elephant family tree. Mammoths and mastodons still roamed in other regions for a time, but the spiral-tusked wanderers were gone, their voices silenced, their trails abandoned. Today, their bones are found scattered across the Americas, sometimes with tusks so well preserved that the spirals still catch the light, as if carved by some patient hand. Each fossil is a whisper of the herds that once passed through valleys and across ridges, carrying the weight of centuries in their footsteps. The spiral of their tusks was not just a feature of anatomy, but a symbol of time itself, winding forward until it unraveled at last. What remains is their story, etched in stone, a memory of a world where elephants took shapes, stranger and more varied than we might ever imagine today. In the heart of ancient South America, there once moved a creature that seemed to blur the line between the ordinary and the fantastical. Its name was Megatherium, the great ground sloth, a titan of the Ice Age whose sheer scale defies easy imagination. When this animal rose onto its hind legs, it towered nearly 20 feet high, as tall as a two-story house, its massive bulk rivaling that of modern elephants. Yet it was not a predator, nor a beast built for speed. It was a giant herbivore, shaped by slow strength, patience, and an anatomy that made it one of the most unusual architects of its environment. Megatherium was a member of the sloth family, but to compare it to the small, gentle tree dwellers we know today is like comparing a sparrow to an eagle. Its arms were thick as tree trunks, ending in claws that curved like scythes, each one longer than a man's hand. These claws were not meant for slashing in combat, though they could defend the animal when necessary. Instead, they were tools for reshaping the world around it. With a single pull, Megatherium could hook its claws into the trunk of a tree and drag it down, stripping leaves and branches that would have been otherwise out of reach. The muscles required for such strength ran deep across its body, from its powerful shoulders to its broad hips. Its back legs were stout and sturdy, built to support its immense weight when it reared upright. In that posture, the giant ground sloth could reach vegetation higher than any other grazing animal in its region. Where mammoths stripped the grasslands of the far north, Megatherium was the towering harvester of the South American forests and savannas. Its diet was varied, consisting mostly of tough leaves, branches, and roots. Fossilized dung samples suggest that it consumed coarse plant matter that many animals would find indigestible, but its massive gut, aided by specialized bacteria, broke down fibers into energy. This ability allowed Megatherium to exploit food sources that smaller herbivores could not handle. It moved slowly across its ranges, stopping to pull down a tree here, uproot shrubs there, and create open spaces that changed the flow of plant life. In this way, Megatherium acted as a gardener of the Ice Age landscape. By tearing down trees, it allowed sunlight to reach the forest floor, encouraging grasses and low plants to grow. These openings attracted other animals, from grazing herbivores to the predators that hunted them. Its presence rippled outward into the ecosystem, shaping plant communities and the movements of other species. Just as elephants are considered keystone species in Africa today, the giant ground sloth, likely held a similar role in its own time, bending the structure of the landscape with every swing of its claws. Imagine encountering such an animal on the plains of Pleistocene South America. Its shaggy fur, thick and coarse, would have swayed as it lumbered forward. Its head, small compared to its body, carried a long muzzle with blunt teeth suited for grinding vegetation. As it stood upright, its claws gleamed in the sunlight, catching the air as it reached for branches high above the ground, and when it moved, the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath its weight. For millions of years, Megatherium thrived across a wide stretch of the continent, from Argentina to the more temperate regions farther north. It lived in herds at times, though not in tight-knit groups, more like loose gatherings that shared feeding grounds. Predators such as saber-toothed cats may have challenged its young or weak members, but few carnivores would dare to confront a full-grown giant ground sloth. One swing of its claws could deliver a fatal blow. Its true challenge was never the hunters that stalked the land, but the changes that slowly reshaped its environment. As the last ice age waned, vegetation zones shifted. Grasslands retreated in some areas, forests transformed, and the plants that Megatherium relied upon became scarcer. Giants like this required enormous amounts of food each day, and when climates altered too quickly, even a creature that had ruled for thousands of years could not easily adapt. The bones of Megatherium remain scattered across South America, some preserved in caves, others in open plains where they once grazed. They tell of a creature that embodied slow power and patient dominance, a beast that shaped the land not with speed or ferocity, but with steady persistence. Their story is etched in the grooves of those long claws, in the massive hip bones built to bear unimaginable weight, and in the teeth that ground through the toughest of leaves. The ground sloth titan is no longer here to pull down trees and open the skies, but its absence reminds us of the fragile threads that hold together even the most colossal forms of life. Across the wide plains and river valleys of ancient South America, there once lumbered a creature that looked like it had rolled out of myth. To the eye, it seemed almost too strange to be real, a massive dome-backed animal, armored from head to tail, grazing with slow determination. This was Glyptodon, a relative of the modern armadillo, though the comparison feels almost unfair. For while today's armadillos can curl up in the palm of a hand, Glyptodon stretched nearly 10 feet in length, the size of a small car, and carried a shell that alone could weigh hundreds of pounds. Its body was wrapped in a fortress of bone. Unlike the banded, flexible shells of modern armadillos, the armor of Glyptodon was fused into a single dome. It was made of hundreds of bony plates, called osteoderms, locked together like pieces of an enormous mosaic. Each plate bore intricate grooves and textures, giving the dome a patterned appearance, almost like the surface of an ancient shield. This shell did not flex or bend. It was solid, heavy, and nearly impenetrable. To most predators, it was less an animal than a living tank, a moving wall of bone and muscle too difficult to crack. Its defenses did not stop with the shell. At the end of its thick tail, Glyptodon carried another weapon. Some species had tails encased in rings of bone, while others developed massive clubs, even tipped with spikes. A swing from such a tail could crush bone, a blow strong enough to fend off even the most determined attacker. Fossil evidence shows fractures on the tails of other Glyptodons, scars from battles with their own kind, suggesting that these giants may have sometimes turned their weapons against one another in contests for dominance. Yet, for all its formidable armor and weaponry, Glyptodon was not a predator. Its life was quiet, centered on the endless rhythm of grazing. With short, heavy skulls and strong jaws, It ground through grasses and coarse plants, turning fibrous stalks into fuel for its great body. Its teeth were unusual, growing continuously to replace the wear of chewing. This allowed Glyptodon to thrive in habitats where tough, gritty plants were the main resource, making it a specialist in an environment that challenged other herbivores. Moving slowly across the grasslands, Glyptodon likely traveled in small groups, their domes rising above the vegetation like low, rounded boulders. Predators such as saber-toothed cats or giant bears may have shadowed them, but these hunters often found easier targets among swifter, less protected prey. A full-grown Glyptodon, armored above and armed behind, was a risky gamble even for the fiercest carnivores of its age. Fossils of Glyptodons have been found across much of South America, showing they were widespread during the Ice Age. From river deltas to open plains, they carved out a niche as grazers of the grasslands, sharing their world with ground sloths, mastodons, and other giants of the Pleistocene. Their presence would have left a mark on the land, as their feeding helped trim vegetation and their weight pressed pathways into the soil. One of the most striking details about Glyptodon's story comes not from its defenses or its size, but from the way humans may have encountered it. Archaeological evidence suggests that early people sometimes used the empty shells of these giants as shelters. Imagine stepping into the dome of a creature that had walked the plains only days before, its curved walls forming a ready-made roof against wind and rain. To people moving across open landscapes, such a shell would have been both resource and refuge, a natural structure shaped by evolution and repurposed by ingenuity. But even armor as thick as stone could not shield Glyptodon from the larger forces of Earth itself. As the last ice age drew to a close, climates warmed, glaciers retreated, and grasslands shifted. The vast meadows that had once nourished herds of these armored giants began to shrink, replaced by forests and wetlands less suited to their specialized diets. Giants require vast amounts of food each day, and when ecosystems change too quickly, their size becomes a burden rather than an advantage. The shells they left behind are some of the most remarkable fossils in the world. In museums, they stand as hollow domes, perfectly preserved, patterned with the same grooves and textures that once protected a living creature. To stand beside one is to glimpse a world where the land was dotted with slow-moving fortresses, grazing in silence, armored against all but time itself. Across the windswept meadows of Ice Age Europe and Asia, there moved a creature so striking that its very silhouette against the horizon must have filled ancient landscapes with awe. Standing taller than most horses, with shoulders rising over 7 feet high, it carried on its head a crown that seemed almost impossible. The Irish elk, despite its name, was neither truly Irish nor closely related to today's elk. It was a giant deer, a member of the Cervidae family, and it bore antlers that stretched wider than the height of a tall man, often reaching 12 feet from tip to tip. To see such an animal grazing in open grasslands must have been like glimpsing a walking cathedral, its antlers rising and branching in elegant arcs toward the sky. The antlers of the Irish elk were not merely large, they were a feat of evolutionary extravagance. Each year they grew anew, sprouting from the animal's skull in a surge of bone and branching structure. Covered at first in soft velvet, nourished by blood vessels, they hardened into weapons and displays that weighed more than 90 pounds in their prime. No other deer has ever carried such immense headgear. To imagine the strain of lifting and moving under such weight is to wonder at the resilience of the animal's neck, muscles, and balance. But these antlers were more than tools of survival. They were signals, luminous banners in the quiet competition of life. Scientists believe that they played a role in sexual selection, serving as displays to attract mates and intimidate rivals. In the way that peacocks spread their tails or songbirds trill elaborate calls, the Irish elk lifted its antlers high, announcing its strength and vitality. In the mating season, males may have clashed with their racks, locking antlers in displays of dominance, the sound of bone striking, bone echoing across the meadows. Yet, for all their grandeur, these antlers were likely more about beauty and persuasion than constant combat. The meadows where they thrived were products of the Ice Age climate. As glaciers waxed and waned, grasslands spread widely across Europe and Asia, providing open spaces rich with forage. The Irish elk browsed these plains, feeding on grasses and low shrubs, their great antlers sweeping above them as they moved in loose herds. Fossils found from Ireland to Siberia testify to their vast range. Caves in Germany, bogs in Ireland, and frozen soils of Russia all hold remains of these deer, painting a picture of an animal that once spanned continents. The size of their antlers, though awe-inspiring, came with a cost. Growing such enormous structures required tremendous amounts of energy and nutrients, particularly calcium and phosphorus. Each year, the cycle of growth demanded resources from the animal's body, resources that became harder to gather as climates changed. When forests began to spread at the close of the Ice Age, the broad meadows shrank. In wooded environments, carrying 12-foot antlers would have been less useful and more cumbersome, catching in branches, limiting movement, and demanding nutrients that were no longer abundant. This tension between extravagance and survival may have been one of the reasons the Irish elk declined. Evolution had given them a structure that was magnificent in open meadows, but less practical as ecosystems shifted. The warming climate that followed the last glacial maximum transformed their landscapes. Grasslands gave way to mixed forests, and the nutritional abundance needed to sustain antler growth dwindled. Without the open spaces that made their displays effective, and without the food resources to rebuild their antlers each year, the balance tipped against them. Still, their bones remain as a reminder of their grandeur. Some of the finest fossils have been preserved in peat bogs, where antlers emerge from the earth as if still reaching for the sky. To stand beside one in a museum today is to be confronted with the full scale of their majesty. The antlers stretch outward, vast and elegant, like branches of a tree turned to stone. It is easy to see why early people, discovering these remains, might have woven myths around them, imagining creatures of legend that carried forests upon their heads. The Irish elk holds a special place among the vanished giants of the Pleistocene, not for ferocity or armor, but for the sheer spectacle of form, a symbol of how evolution sometimes shapes life in ways that dazzle the eye, even if they lead to fragility. Across the windswept steppes of the Pleistocene, where icy winds combed across grasslands that seemed to stretch without end, there roamed an animal built like a tank and dressed for winter. The woolly rhinoceros was a cousin to the rhinos we know today, yet it carried itself with adaptations that made it uniquely suited to an Ice Age world. Covered in thick, shaggy fur, it stood lower to the ground than its modern relatives, but its body was heavy-set and immensely strong, with broad shoulders and a distinctive hump of muscle that rose behind its head. This hump was more than a feature of strength. It stored fat reserves and insurance against the long, frozen months when food grew scarce. Its most striking feature, though, was its horn. Stretched along the snout, the horn of the woolly rhinoceros could grow longer than 4 feet, curving slightly and wearing grooves from a lifetime of use. Unlike the smooth horns of modern species, this one bore the marks of scraping against icy ground and sweeping aside snow. These animals did not dig for roots or bark in forests, but grazed in open steppes, where their horns allowed them to clear drifts and uncover the grasses beneath. Fossils of the horns show polished undersides, a record of this constant sweeping, as if each animal's horn carried the memory of 1,000 winters. The environment in which they thrived was known as the mammoth steppe, a vast biome that stretched from Western Europe through Siberia and across the Bering Land Bridge into North America. It was not a barren wasteland, but a rich grassland ecosystem filled with hardy plants, flowering herbs, and grasses that could withstand the cold. In these lands, herds of woolly rhinoceroses grazed alongside mammoths, bison, and wild horses. They were browsers, as well as grazers, nibbling shrubs and herbs, their massive teeth grinding vegetation into pulp with every jawful. Evidence of their presence has been found not only in bones but in art. In caves deep within the heart of Ice Age Europe, humans painted images of woolly rhinoceroses on stone walls. The figures are recognizable, broad-bodied with the unmistakable arch of their horns. Some are shown in pairs, some in motion, as if drawn from memory by people who lived among them. To leave an image of an animal on a cave wall is to preserve a memory in a way more enduring than words. These paintings, tens of thousands of years old, confirm that the woolly rhinoceros was not merely a figure of the natural world, but part of the imagination of early people, a creature that inspired awe, strong enough to be carved into memory through art. Fossils of woolly rhinoceroses also offer a remarkable gift to science. In the permafrost of Siberia, entire carcasses have been preserved for thousands of years. These remains, with hair still intact and even stomach contents preserved, allow us to glimpse them as if they had only recently fallen. In one specimen, found in the frozen ground of Yakutia, scientists discovered grass still in its mouth, as though it had been grazing at the moment of death before sudden cold locked it in time. Such finds create a bridge across ages, giving not only bones but textures and colors, the tangible presence of a creature that once breathed on frozen steppes. The survival of the woolly rhinoceros depended on those very steppes. The wide open plains, rich in grasses and shrubs, sustained them through long winters and brief summers. But as the Ice Age waned, the world shifted. The glaciers began to retreat, climates warmed, and the mammoth steppe that had stretched across continents began to shrink. Grasslands gave way to forests and wetlands in many places, narrowing the rhinoceros's range. Animals that had been specialists in one kind of habitat now found themselves trapped in a world that no longer favored them. This transition happened not in a sudden crash, but in slow waves, with each generation of woolly rhinoceroses facing slightly different conditions than the one before. The cold-adapted vegetation thinned, the fertile steppe retreated northward, and the balance tipped against them. Fossil records show that they survived late into the Ice Age, enduring in isolated regions long after many of their contemporaries had already vanished. But eventually, the grasslands could no longer sustain herds of creatures so large and demanding. To picture one standing in the steppe is to imagine a being carved by necessity, fur rippling in the wind, horns sweeping snow aside with each movement of its heavy head. They were animals perfectly attuned to the cold world they inhabited, a reminder that evolution shapes life to fit its time with extraordinary precision. And when that time passes, even the most resilient designs can falter. On the open plains of the late Ice Age, when mammoths drifted like shadows across the horizon and herds of bison churned the ground into mud, there was a predator whose presence was measured not in the strength of a single body, but in the unity of the pack. The dire wolf, larger and heavier than the wolves that walk the earth today, was one of the most successful hunters of the Pleistocene. Its heavy frame and deep jaws spoke of raw power, yet its true strength came from cooperation, from the chorus of howls that must once have echoed through valleys and across frozen rivers. The dire wolf, known to science as Canis dirus, bore a close resemblance to the gray wolf, but with differences that reveal its Ice Age role. Its skull was broader, its teeth more massive, and its jaws were built to crush. Fossil analysis shows that the bite force of the dire wolf was formidable, strong enough to puncture through the hides of giant herbivores or splinter the bones left after a kill. Where gray wolves rely on speed and stamina, the dire wolf carried a heavier, sturdier build, weighing as much as 150 pounds, with stocky legs that spoke of strength over distance rather than swiftness alone. One of the greatest windows into their lives lies in the La Brea tar pits of California. Here, for tens of thousands of years, animals became trapped in pools of natural asphalt, their struggles attracting predators eager for an easy meal. The predators themselves, drawn too close, became ensnared in the sticky surface, adding their bones to the accumulating graveyard. Among the fossil treasures of La Brea are the remains of thousands of dire wolves, more than any other predator. Rows upon rows of skulls and teeth have been unearthed, painting a picture of a hunter that was not rare or elusive, but abundant and dominant across the landscape. The sheer number of wolves recovered suggests that they lived and hunted in large packs. Imagine a herd of bison floundering in mud or snow, and from the distance, a pack of dire wolves approaches. Their bodies move in rhythm, their strategy unfolding with precision. Some circle wide to distract, others dart forward to nip at legs and flanks, while the strongest focus on wearing down the massive beast. Each wolf alone could never succeed, but together they could bring down animals far larger than themselves. Their coordination, sharpened by countless hunts, made them masters of the open plains. The prey they targeted included horses, camels, bison, and even the young of mammoths or mastodons. These animals were not easy quarry. They were strong, fast, and often defended by horns, hooves, or tusks. But the wolves' persistence, their ability to chase and harry in shifts, meant that even the mightiest herbivore could be weakened over time. Fossil bones of prey show tooth marks from dire wolves, the grooves of their teeth preserved as evidence of meals consumed long ago. Yet the fossil record also whispers of lives lived in more subtle ways. Some dire wolf bones bear signs of healed fractures and injuries, suggesting that injured members of the pack were not abandoned. They may have been fed by their companions, cared for until they recovered. This glimpse into their lives reveals not just hunters, but social creatures, bound by ties strong enough to endure hardship together. Their survival was not only about strength and numbers, but about community. For hundreds of thousands of years, dire wolves flourished across both North and South America. Their range stretched from the frozen north down into the warm plains of the south, showing a resilience that allowed them to adapt to different environments. But as the Ice Age waned, the world around them began to change. The great herds that once filled the steppes dwindled as grasslands shrank and forests spread. Climate warming tipped the balance of ecosystems, and the colossal prey animals that had sustained the wolves began to vanish. In this new world, flexibility became the key to survival. Gray wolves, lighter and more adaptable, could shift their diets to smaller prey, scavenging when needed and covering longer distances in search of food. Dire wolves, heavier and more specialized, found themselves outmatched in this new order. Their strong jaws and heavy bodies, once their greatest advantage, became a burden when large prey became scarce. Genetic studies suggest they were a lineage distinct from modern wolves, unable to interbreed and share traits that might have helped them adapt. They were locked into a form finely tuned for a world that no longer existed. In the silence of their absence, what remains are their bones, skull after skull at La Brea, each one broad, heavy, with jaws built to crush. To stand before these relics is to picture the living animals, heavy heads lifted to the sky, voices raised together in howls that once rolled across icy plains. The dire wolf was not a lone hunter, but a creature of bonds, of shared purpose, thriving in an age of giants until the world shifted beneath its feet. In the frozen heart of the Pleistocene, when the wind carved icy ridges into open plains and herds of mammoths stirred the snow into clouds, there was a predator whose very presence carried weight across continents. The cave lion, Panthera spilea, walked the grasslands of Eurasia and the broad valleys of North America, larger than any lion alive today. These cats were rulers of the cold steppe, hunters whose size and strength placed them among the most formidable predators the world has ever known. The cave lion was distinct from the African lions that now prowl the savannas. They were broader, heavier, with males standing nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder and stretching over 8 feet in length. Fossil comparisons suggest they may have been up to 25% larger than modern lions, making them true titans of their kind. Their coats, preserved in rare frozen remains, were thick and pale, adapted to the icy landscapes they inhabited. Unlike the lions we know today, they likely lacked manes, their faces smooth and austere, perhaps as an adaptation to conserve heat in cold climates. Evidence of their presence is scattered not only through fossil bone, but through ancient art. Across caves in France, Germany, and other regions of Europe, Ice Age people painted lions onto rock walls, etched their forms into ivory, and carved them into figurines. The depictions show groups of lions hunting together, sometimes even with males and females side by side, suggesting that cave lions lived in prides much as their modern relatives do. These drawings stand as some of the earliest portraits humanity ever made, capturing the power of a predator that shared their world. Their hunting grounds stretched from the Iberian Peninsula through the Siberian tundra and across the land bridge into North America. In these vast territories, they hunted herds of bison, wild horses, reindeer, and even the young of mammoths or woolly rhinoceroses. Their size gave them strength, but survival in such cold landscapes required strategy. It is believed they worked in coordinated groups, much like African lions today, surrounding prey and overwhelming it with collective force. Fossil bones of prey animals often show tooth and claw marks, grim reminders of encounters with these predators. Some clues also lie in dens, where cave lion remains have been found alongside bones of cubs. These sites suggest that they raised their young in sheltered spaces, away from the harshest winds of the open steppe. The cubs themselves, preserved in Siberian permafrost, reveal details of their coats, their rounded faces, and even traces of the fur patterning that may have helped them blend into snowy terrain. Holding such remains in a museum is to see time itself paused, the softness of their fur whispering across thousands of years. The world of the cave lions was rich in prey, yet fragile in balance. They lived in the cold, adapted steppe tundra that spread widely during the height of the Ice Age, landscapes of dry grasses that supported immense herds. These ecosystems were like engines, fueled by the movement of grazers and shaped by the predators that followed them. But as the Ice Age drew to a close, climates began to shift. The vast open steppes that had supported lions and their prey retreated, forests spread, grasslands shrank, and the great herds diminished. For a predator that relied on wide hunting ranges and abundant prey, This narrowing of habitat carried immense costs. Fossil evidence suggests cave lions survived deep into the late Pleistocene, thriving even as glaciers receded, but their hold on the land grew weaker as their hunting grounds fragmented. By around 14,000 years ago, in Eurasia, and slightly later in some regions, their presence fades from the record. The bones fall silent, the cave paintings stand unfinished, and the tundra winds carry only echoes. The absence of manes on their faces may have given them a colder, more spectral look compared to the lions of Africa today. Imagine them on the horizon of a snowy plain, broad shoulders swaying, pale fur blending into the frozen world behind them. A pride of cave lions approaching would not have been heralded by roars alone, but by the low silence that falls when prey animals sense danger in their midst. Unlike some Ice Age predators that survived in reduced forms, the cave lions left no direct descendants. Their story ended with the collapse of the steppes that had sustained them. Yet their traces remain imprinted not only in the ground, but in the imagination of those who once lived beside them. The people who painted their images on cave walls preserved something of their majesty, capturing forever the outline of a predator that dominated their skies and plains. The cave lion was not just an animal of flesh and bone, but a symbol of power in an Ice Age world. Its broad paws once pressed deep tracks into the snow. Its pale body once cast shadows across moonlit tundra. Today, those tracks have long since melted, and the shadows are gone, but the silence they left still speaks of a predator that shaped the world it walked through. In the wide grasslands and shadowed woodlands of Ice Age America, there prowled a predator that dwarfed the lions of today. Known as Panthera atrox, the American lion was a giant among cats, a hunter whose body stretched longer and stood taller than the African lions we now imagine as the kings of the savannah. It is believed to have been up to a quarter larger, with males weighing as much as 600 pounds or more, making it the heaviest lion to ever live. To see such a creature moving across the plains would have been to witness power contained in muscle and bone, a hunter built for ambush and strength. The American lion's range was extraordinary. Fossils reveal its presence from Alaska down to the southern reaches of South America, a sweep of territory unmatched by most predators. This wide distribution shows just how adaptable it was. It roamed icy tundra edges, temperate valleys, and arid plains, slipping into every corner of the continents where prey herds were thick. In caves across North America, bones of Panthera atrox lie alongside those of mammoths, horses, camels, and bison, silent testimony to the vast hunting grounds it once ruled. Unlike the cave lion of Eurasia, which left its memory in paintings on stone walls, the American lion left no human-made portraits. Instead, its story survives through fossil remains scattered across tar pits, riverbeds, and caverns. At the La Brea tar pits in California, hundreds of lion bones have been uncovered, showing that these cats were frequent hunters in those regions. The pits trapped prey animals, and in the chaos of attempted predation, predators like lions would also become stuck, leaving behind skeletons that still gleam dark with preserved tar. These bones show their long limbs, powerful shoulders, and skulls that hint at both speed and crushing bite strength. The American lion was not a pursuit predator like wolves. Its build suggests that it relied on ambush. Its limbs were longer than those of modern lions, giving it a stride that could explode into a sudden sprint. Muscular shoulders and strong jaws reveal that once it caught its prey, it could pull down animals many times its own weight. Imagine a lion larger than any alive today, springing from the tall grass to seize a startled horse, or sinking claws into a bison struggling against the weight of its attacker. Even young mammoths may have fallen to its assaults. though such prey would have been taken at great risk. Some researchers believe the American lion may have hunted alone, using stealth and strength rather than the group strategies of modern prides. Its immense size would have given it the confidence to tackle large prey without the aid of companions. Others argue that fossil evidence showing multiple individuals together suggests that they may have shared food or lived in loose groups. The truth is uncertain, but both possibilities paint a picture of a predator fully capable of dominating its environment. Their range extended into South America, likely spreading through the Isthmus of Panama when the continents connected. There, they joined landscapes filled with other giants, ground sloths, glyptodons, and mastodons. To imagine the American lion among these creatures is to see a world alive with monumental life, where every step carried the weight of survival and scale. The decline of the American lion is tied closely to the fate of its prey. These cats relied on the great herds of the Ice Age for food, bison, camels, and horses that filled the plains. As the climate warmed toward the end of the Pleistocene, many of these large herbivores began to vanish. The open grasslands shrank, forests spread, and the numbers of prey animals declined. For a predator of such size, needing immense amounts of meat to survive, the disappearance of these herds spelled disaster. Within a few thousand years, the bones of Panthera atrox disappear from the fossil record, leaving only fragments to remind us of what once was. To stand before the skull of an American lion in a museum is to look into eyes that once scanned horizons of endless grass, to see teeth that could puncture hide and crush bone. Its absence leaves a gap in the story of the Americas, a silence where once the land trembled beneath the weight of its hunts. The world that supported it is gone, and with it the great lion itself, leaving behind not roars across the plains, but bones resting in shadowed earth. In the sweeping grasslands of the Ice Age world, shadows moved not just with herds of grazing giants, but with those who followed close behind them. Among the scavengers and hunters of that age, there was one that stood out in both size and power. This was Pachycrocuta brevirostris, the giant hyena, a creature that dwarfed its modern relatives and lived as the undisputed king of bones. Modern spotted hyenas are formidable in their own right, with strong jaws capable of cracking the thick leg bones of antelope or buffalo. Yet Pachycrocuta was nearly twice their size, standing as tall as a large wolf at the shoulder, with a body built not for graceful pursuit, but for raw strength. Estimates suggest these hyenas could weigh more than 200 pounds, their frames heavy and broad, with skulls deep and jaws reinforced like natural anvils. Their teeth and bite force were adapted to crush and consume bones, extracting every calorie of marrow from carcasses. This specialization gave them the role of recyclers of the Ice Age plains, ensuring that little of a kill ever went to waste. Fossils of Pachycrocuta are found across parts of Africa, Europe, and Asia, revealing that this species was not just confined to a single region but roamed widely, following the movements of prey herds and the predators that hunted them. In many fossil sites, their remains are accompanied by dense accumulations of broken bones. These bone beds are believed to be the remains of dens or feeding sites, where giant hyenas dragged carcasses to be cracked apart. Some caves show layers upon layers of shattered remains, evidence of their dominance as bone specialists. Unlike cats such as the saber-toothed smilodon, which relied on stealth and ambush, Pachycrocuta seems to have thrived on opportunism. They were not fast runners built for long chases, and their heavy structure suggests they would have struggled to pursue swift animals over open ground. Instead, they likely relied on stealing kills, overpowering competitors, or feeding on carcasses left behind by larger predators. Imagine the scene on a cold plain. A pride of lions or a lone saber-toothed cat brings down a bison, only to hear the low, rolling calls of giant hyenas approaching. With jaws that could snap bones like kindling and numbers on their side, the hyenas would close in, harassing until the original hunters were driven away. What remained after their feeding frenzy was little more than splinters of bone. This dominance as scavenger kings did not mean they were weak. On the contrary, their very presence altered the behavior of other predators. A saber-toothed cat could not leave its kill unattended for long, or it risked losing it to a pack of bone crushers. Even wolves and smaller hyenas would have avoided confrontation, giving way to the sheer power of Macrauchenia. Yet their size and specialization, which gave them such power, also made them vulnerable. As climates shifted and ecosystems changed toward the end of the Ice Age, the balance of predator and prey began to tip. The vast herds of grazing animals that once covered the plains grew smaller as grasslands retreated and forests expanded. With fewer large carcasses available, bone-crushing scavengers had less to sustain them. At the same time, competition increased. More adaptable carnivores, such as wolves and smaller hyenas, could survive on a wider range of food, from small mammals to carrion. The giant hyena, however, was bound by its specialization. Its immense size required steady access to large carcasses, and its heavy frame was poorly suited to chasing smaller prey. Fossil evidence suggests that as prey species declined, so too did Macrauchenia. Within a few thousand years, they had vanished, leaving only the traces of shattered bone piles to mark their reign. Even so, their legacy remains written in the fossil record. Their skulls, with massive jaws and teeth worn flat from endless bone grinding, are among the clearest signs of nature's experiment with specialization. Where other predators sought flesh, Macrauchenia sought marrow, turning what others left behind into sustenance. In that way, they played a vital role in Ice Age ecosystems, ensuring that energy was never wasted, that even the hardest bones were not beyond reach. To imagine them now is to picture a world where size and strength gave certain creatures an aura of invincibility. Twice the bulk of the spotted hyena, their heads massive, their jaws crushing, their presence must have carried a sense of inevitability. When giant hyenas appeared on the horizon, others scattered, and the bones of the fallen cracked beneath their bite. Their extinction reminds us that even dominance has limits when the world shifts beneath your feet. In the wetlands and slow rivers of the Ice Age, there lived an engineer of unusual proportions. Not the small, industrious beavers we know today, but their immense cousins, Castoroides ohioensis, the giant beavers. These creatures were among the largest rodents ever to exist, reaching sizes comparable to modern black bears. Some stretched more than 8 feet from nose to tail and could weigh well over 200 pounds. To see one moving through the reeds or paddling across a pond would have been to glimpse a familiar silhouette, yet made strange by its sheer scale. Their most striking feature was their teeth. Like modern beavers, they had incisors that never stopped growing, but on these giants, those teeth could measure more than a foot in length. Unlike the sharp chisels of today's beavers, the teeth of Castoroides were broad and ridged, shaped less for carving intricate woodwork and more for powerful gnawing. Imagine the sound of such incisors grinding into a tree trunk, echoing across a still Ice Age wetland, the water shimmering with the disturbance of falling branches. The wetlands of North America during the Pleistocene were vast and varied. Rivers meandered through grasslands, lakes pooled in glacial basins, and marshes spread across low valleys. In these habitats, giant beavers thrived. They likely built lodges and dams, much as their smaller relatives do today, though on a grander scale. Fossil evidence suggests that they transformed landscapes by felling trees, redirecting streams, and shaping wetlands into protective habitats. In doing so, they acted as ecosystem engineers, altering environments in ways that benefited countless other species. The lodges of these animals must have been monumental structures, woven from tree trunks and branches, sealed with mud and reeds. Inside, family groups would have sheltered from predators, and the cold, safe behind walls that stood firm against the currents. Like their modern kin, they may have created ponds that slowed rivers, encouraging the spread of wetland plants and attracting birds, amphibians, and fish. In shaping the water, they shaped the life around it. Yet, for all their similarity to today's beavers, there were key differences. Their hind feet were large and webbed, perfect for swimming, but their tails were not the flat paddles we might expect. Instead, the giant beaver's tail was more like that of a muskrat, long and narrow, suggesting that they moved differently in the water, perhaps with slower, more deliberate strokes. And their teeth, while powerful, may not have been as well suited for precise woodcutting. Some scientists believe this means they relied more on natural wetlands rather than actively constructing dams as extensively as modern beavers do. Still, their presence would have reshaped river systems just by the scale of their feeding and building. The story of their disappearance is tied to the shifting climate at the close of the Ice Age. As glaciers retreated and temperatures rose, the wetlands that had once covered broad regions began to shrink. Rivers cut deeper channels, marshes dried, and open grasslands spread in their place. For animals so dependent on wetlands, this loss was devastating. Fossil records show that by around 10,000 years ago, the giant beaver had vanished, leaving only the smaller beavers to inherit the watery realms. Their extinction also raises questions about interactions with humans. Early peoples of North America would have encountered these animals as they spread across rivers and lakes. Some researchers suggest that human hunting may have contributed to their decline, though direct evidence is scarce. What is certain is that people lived alongside them, perhaps watching these immense rodents glide across still waters, their silhouettes mirrored in the moonlight. For a hunter-gatherer, the sight of such an animal might have seemed almost mythic. What lingers in their story is the reminder that giants are not always the towering predators or massive grazers of open plains. Sometimes they are quiet builders, creatures that transform the land not through dominance, but through persistence. The giant beaver carried whole forests in its jaws, shifted rivers with its lodges, and created wetlands that pulsed with life. Their absence is felt not only in the silence of their teeth against wood, but in the landscapes that changed when their building ceased. In the forests of the Ice Age world, among the whispering pines and broadleaf trees, there walked a creature that looked familiar at first glance, but carried its own ancient story. These were the mastodons, relatives of elephants and mammoths, yet distinct in their form and in the lives they led. Their heavy bodies moved slowly through woodlands, their trunks sweeping across shrubs and trees, their tusks curving straight ahead like spears carved from ivory. Unlike the mammoths that wandered the open grasslands, mastodons were browsers of the forest. Their teeth tell the story most clearly. Where mammoths carried flat-ridged molars, suited to grinding tough grasses, mastodons had cone-shaped cusps, almost like a row of pointed peaks. These were perfect for breaking down woody twigs, bark, and leaves. Their diet tied them closely to the wooded regions of North America, where forests stretched across wide distances and provided an endless supply of browse. The very texture of their teeth reminds us that evolution designs with precision, shaping animals for the worlds they inhabit. A mastodon could stand nearly 10 feet at the shoulder, its body covered in a thick coat of hair to withstand the chills of the Ice Age. Their tusks, sometimes extending more than 8 feet, were not the graceful curves of the woolly mammoth, but straighter, angled forward. Some tusks arched slightly, while others jutted almost parallel to the ground. They were powerful tools, useful for stripping bark, uprooting shrubs, and even for defense against predators. Imagine one of these giants lowering its tusks into a thicket, prying loose branches to reach tender shoots hidden within. Every movement carried the weight of centuries of adaptation. Their range was immense. Fossils of mastodons have been found from Alaska down through the Great Lakes and across much of North America. They even roamed into parts of Eurasia in earlier times, showing that their lineage once stretched across continents. In wetlands and river valleys, they left behind bones buried in peat bogs, sometimes preserved so well that hair and flesh remain. One of the most striking discoveries came from a mastodon found in Michigan, its remains preserved in the wet earth. The animal had been so intact that even stomach contents could be examined, revealing the twigs and pine needles it had eaten shortly before its death. These snapshots of their lives allow us to step closer, to almost see them alive again among the forests. They were not solitary wanderers. Evidence suggests mastodons often traveled in family groups, much like elephants today. The bonds between mothers and calves may have been strong, the herd moving as a unit through wooded terrain, protecting the young within a circle of massive bodies. In their slow migration, they shaped the forests themselves. By feeding heavily on shrubs and saplings, they opened pathways that other animals followed. Their dung, rich with seeds, carried plants to new places. In this way, mastodons were gardeners of the forest, their lives intertwined with the very structure of the land. Yet their success carried them only so far. As the Ice Age drew to a close, the forests that had sustained them began to change. Climate warmed, glaciers melted, and the great woodlands shifted. Some regions dried, giving way to open grasslands where mammoths fared better. Others transformed into swamps and wetlands, less suited to such massive grazers. The mastodons, so finely tuned to a life of browsing in cold forests, found fewer of the foods they needed. Their decline was not sudden, but it was steady. Fossils show that mastodons lingered in pockets where forest cover remained, holding on for thousands of years as their world narrowed around them. Some scientists suggest that human hunters may have also played a role in their disappearance. Spear points have been found near mastodon remains, hinting that these giants may have been among the prey targeted by the earliest peoples in North America. The combined pressure of shrinking habitat and hunting likely sealed their fate. By around 10,000 years ago, mastodons had vanished. The forests grew quiet without their footsteps, the shrubs no longer torn down by their trunks, the rivers no longer disturbed by their great bodies passing through. What remains are the traces in the earth, the bones pulled from peat bogs and tar pits, the ivory tusks that still gleam with a ghostly sheen. Each fossil tells us of a creature that once seemed unshakable, a browser that had thrived through ages of cold, but could not withstand the warming world. When most people imagine the Ice Age, the creature that comes to mind first is the mammoth. Their shaggy silhouettes have come to symbolize the frozen world of the Pleistocene, great figures covered in long hair, tusks curling in sweeping arcs, and massive bodies moving slowly across tundra and steppe. They were among the last of the great Ice Age giants, remembered more clearly than many others, because they left behind not only bones but flesh, hair, and even entire frozen bodies sealed in the cold of the far north. Their presence is woven into the memory of human art and story, painted in caves and carved into ivory long before their final herds disappeared. The woolly mammoth, Mammothus primigenius, is the best known of their kind. Standing as high as an elephant, yet cloaked in a thick coat of shaggy fur with a dense underlayer to trap warmth, it was built for bitter cold. Beneath that fur, mammoths carried a thick layer of fat, sometimes more than 4 inches deep, which helped insulate them from icy winds. Their small ears and short tails reduced heat loss, while their enormous curved tusks, sometimes reaching more than 12 feet in length, became tools for survival. With those tusks, mammoths scraped through snow to uncover the frozen grasses beneath, carved paths across ice, and fought off rivals when herds gathered in the open plains. The world they roamed was not barren but teeming with life. Mammoths grazed across the steppe tundra, a biome that stretched in a vast belt from Western Europe, across Siberia, and into North America. This land was unlike the tundra of today. Instead of mosses and stunted shrubs, it was dominated by nutrient-rich grasses, herbs, and flowering plants, an endless pasture that supported herds of giant herbivores. Here, mammoths fed in great numbers, their movements shaping the land itself. By grazing heavily, they kept meadows open, and by trampling paths, they created networks that smaller animals followed. Some scientists even suggest that mammoths helped maintain these grasslands, keeping them from turning into forests. Their role as ecosystem shapers may have been as important as their presence was imposing. Although the woolly mammoth is the most iconic, it was not the only member of its family. Other species filled different habitats. The Columbian mammoth of North America was larger and less hairy, adapted for warmer climates in the south. The steppe mammoth, one of the earliest, was even bigger, a towering ancestor that may have stood over 15 feet tall. These variations reveal how adaptable mammoths were, spreading across continents and thriving in very different environments. Their bones have been uncovered from Spain to Alaska, and their ivory traded far and wide in ancient times. They were truly a global presence. Despite their strength and numbers, mammoths faced the same challenge that tested all Ice Age giants: change. As the climate warmed after the last glacial maximum, their frozen grasslands began to vanish. The open steppes gave way to forests in many regions, reducing the space where mammoths could graze. With their heavy bodies and specialized diets, they were not as flexible as smaller animals that could adjust to shifting resources. Herds dwindled, their once vast range shrinking to the cold fringes of the earth. Yet they did not vanish all at once. In isolated corners of the world, small populations held on far longer than the great herds of the mainland. On Wrangel Island, a remote land in the Arctic Ocean, mammoths survived until only about 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids of Egypt had already been built. On St. Paul Island in Alaska, another stranded population endured for thousands of years before dwindling away. These last survivors lived in a world where humans had already begun to write history, yet they remained hidden on lonely islands, echoes of a vanished age. Their extinction was shaped by multiple pressures. Climate change closed the open pastures they needed, while human hunters may have added strain, taking down mammoths for food, clothing, and ivory. The final herds likely suffered from inbreeding and limited resources, trapped on shrinking islands or in isolated valleys. What remains are bones pulled from frozen ground, tusks that still gleam with their ivory sheen, and entire mammoths locked in permafrost, their skin and fur still intact, their last meals still preserved in their stomachs. From these frozen bodies, we see them not as abstractions, but as living beings, their eyes once bright, their herds once thundering across the plains. Even in silence, they remain unforgettable. Their image carved into stone by ancient hands, their story whispered by the ice. Mammoths linger as icons of the great Ice Age world. Across the ancient landscapes of Ice Age Australia, there moved a kangaroo unlike the ones we know today. Modern kangaroos are instantly recognizable for their bounding leaps, their long tails balancing their powerful bodies as they spring across open plains. But their Ice Age relatives, the short-faced kangaroos, belong to a different chapter of evolution. These were giants, some standing more than 10 feet tall, built not for hopping quickly across fields but for walking upright, like slow, towering browsers among the trees. The most striking of these was Procoptodon goliah, the largest kangaroo species ever known. Where today's kangaroos are long-limbed and slender, these Ice Age giants were robust and muscular, their bodies shaped for strength rather than speed. Their faces were shorter and more compact, giving them a distinctive appearance compared to their modern cousins. Instead of bounding in great leaps, evidence from their anatomy suggests they strode forward, one heavy step at a time, moving in a way more like a person than the bounding rhythm of the red kangaroo. Their legs were thick and powerful, their hips wide, and their build suggested balance and control more than agility. What set them apart even further was their diet. Short-faced kangaroos were browsers, feeding mainly on leaves, shrubs, and higher vegetation rather than the grasses that supported many other herbivores of their age. Their upright posture and their great height gave them access to plants that smaller animals could not easily reach. With their strong arms and large hands, they could grasp branches, pulling down clusters of leaves to feed. This way of living placed them in a different ecological role from their modern descendants, one more similar to that of browsing antelope or even giraffes, though they were marsupials uniquely shaped by Australia's environment. Their strength was visible not only in their size, but in their bones. The short-faced kangaroo's skeleton reveals immense power in its shoulders and arms, suggesting that they were capable of grasping and manipulating branches with surprising force. Their massive skulls and strong jaws supported teeth designed to grind tough plant material, well adapted to the drier and more variable climates of late Pleistocene Australia. These adaptations allowed them to thrive in regions where rainfall was irregular and resources scarce. The Australian continent at this time was home to an entire community of giant marsupials. Alongside the short-faced kangaroos lived enormous wombat-like creatures called diprotodons, marsupial lions with sharp scissor-like teeth and massive flightless birds. In this company of giants, Procoptodon was not unusual, but rather part of a broader pattern of megafauna that dominated Australia's Ice Age ecosystems. The grasslands and woodlands of the continent were shaped by these animals, their feeding and movements influencing the growth of plants and the spread of seeds. Despite their impressive adaptations, the short-faced kangaroos could not outlast the environmental shifts that marked the end of the Pleistocene. As the world warmed and the great ice sheets retreated elsewhere, Australia experienced growing aridity. Rainfall patterns changed, and the habitats that once supported lush shrubs and woodlands began to shrink. For a browser that depended heavily on specific plants, these changes proved devastating. Large herbivores like Procoptodon required vast amounts of food to sustain their bulk, and when the supply dwindled, their numbers fell. Fossil evidence shows that they survived until relatively late in the Pleistocene, their bones found in caves and dry basins across Australia. But by the close of this epoch, they had disappeared. Unlike their smaller kangaroo relatives, which could adapt to shifting environments and survive on a wider range of vegetation, The giants were too specialized and too dependent on conditions that no longer held. What remains of them today are fragments of skeletons, impressions of their immense feet, and the stories written in their bones. To imagine standing before one is to picture a creature both familiar and alien, a kangaroo in outline, yet shaped into something far more imposing, its upright posture and sheer scale giving it a presence unlike any living marsupial. In the silence of Australia's deserts and forests, where their steps once fell, their absence is still felt in the spaces they once filled. In the windswept plains and valleys of Ice Age South America, there lived a creature that looked as if nature had pieced it together from several different animals. Its body resembled that of a camel, long-legged and sturdy, built for covering great distances across open landscapes. Its neck stretched upward, giving it a graceful profile, while its head ended in a short trunk-like snout, flexible and capable of reaching leaves and shrubs. This was Macrauchenia, an animal whose very form continues to puzzle scientists more than 2 centuries after its discovery. The first fossils of Macrauchenia were unearthed in the early 19th century, and they sparked immediate fascination. Charles Darwin himself collected bones of this animal during his famous voyage aboard the Beagle. When paleontologists examined the remains, they were struck by its strange combination of features. Its legs were built for running, like those of horses or camels. Its teeth revealed a diet of shrubs and grasses, suggesting it was a browser and grazer able to survive on varied vegetation. But the nasal openings in its skull were placed high on its head, far higher than in most mammals, leading researchers to suspect that it carried a small trunk or an enlarged, flexible nose. This feature gave Macrauchenia its reputation as an enigma, a creature that looked like no other. The idea of a camel-like body topped with a tapir-like trunk captured imaginations, and it still stands as one of the most distinctive designs of the Pleistocene. Reconstructions vary, some showing it with a long, prehensile snout capable of wrapping around branches, others with a shorter, muscular nose more suited to pulling leaves. Either way, it was an adaptation that gave the animal an advantage in browsing from shrubs and trees, especially in dry or open habitats where vegetation was scattered. Macrauchenia could grow nearly 10 feet long and stand over 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Despite its size, its long, sturdy legs suggest that it was an agile runner, able to escape predators across the open plains. This agility may have been vital because South America during the Pleistocene was home to formidable hunters. Saber-toothed cats prowled its grasslands. Packs of dire wolves followed herds across valleys. Giant flightless birds, though declining by this time, had once ruled as swift predators. In this landscape, speed and awareness were just as important as size and strength. Its role in the ecosystem was that of a mid-level browser, shaping vegetation patterns by feeding on shrubs, small trees, and grasses, unlike giant sloths that tore down branches with claws, or armored glyptodons that grazed low to the ground. Macrauchenia filled a niche between, gently stripping leaves and pulling down stems with its trunked snout. In doing so, it helped maintain the balance of plant life across large areas, preventing shrubs from overtaking grasslands and allowing diverse habitats to flourish. One of the most fascinating aspects of Macrauchenia is its evolutionary placement. For decades, scientists debated where it belonged in the mammal family tree. Its skeleton bore similarities to camels, yet it lacked their specialized stomach system. Its teeth resembled those of horses, yet its skull differed sharply. Genetic studies from preserved collagen have since revealed that it belonged to a group called Litopterns, an entirely South American lineage of hoofed mammals now completely extinct. This finding underlined just how unique South America's evolutionary history was, shaped in isolation before the continents connected more fully. But even uniqueness could not protect it from change. As the Pleistocene neared its end, climates shifted rapidly. The grasslands and open woodlands that sustained Macrauchenia began to fragment, shrinking under drier conditions and warming temperatures. With fewer shrubs and browse plants, its food sources grew scarce. At the same time, new waves of predators expanded their ranges, and competition for survival became more intense. By around 12,000 years ago, Macrauchenia had disappeared. Its bones, scattered in the soils of Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, are the last silent record of its presence. What makes its extinction so haunting is how recent it was in geological terms, a reminder that these creatures lived not in the age of dinosaurs, but in a world that in many ways mirrored our own. To picture Macrauchenia today is to imagine a herd moving slowly across a sunlit plain, their long necks swaying, trunks tugging gently at branches as they browse. In the distance, predators watch, gauging their speed, waiting for a misstep. The air carries the quiet sound of leaves torn from stems, of hooves pressing into the earth. It is an image of a world that was once full of strangeness and balance, a world now gone, leaving only fossils to whisper its story. In the deep forests of the Pleistocene, beneath canopies dripping with mist and vines, there lived creatures that seemed like echoes from a primeval past. Among them were giant tapirs, animals far larger than their modern cousins, moving quietly along riverbanks and through dense undergrowth. They had the same gentle shape we still recognize today, with rounded bodies, sturdy legs, and flexible trunks that curled downward, but in the Ice Age they grew to sizes that made them stand out in their shadowed worlds. Modern tapirs, found in Asia and South America, are shy and reclusive. They slip silently through jungles, browsing on leaves, fruit, and soft shoots. The giant tapirs of the Pleistocene carried this same lifestyle, but on a larger scale. They could weigh well over half a ton, their broad bodies built to press through thick vegetation. Their prehensile snouts worked like small trunks, curling around leaves and tugging at fruit, giving them access to a wide menu of forest foods. This ability to handle many plant types gave them resilience in lush, humid environments. The forests they inhabited were far different from the tundras and open plains where mammoths and bison roamed. In Asia, giant tapirs wandered through warm, wet forests that flourished along rivers and valleys. Fossils discovered in China and Southeast Asia show they were well adapted to these habitats. In South America, their relatives browsed along jungle edges and wetlands, where the air was heavy with moisture and greenery was abundant. Unlike the towering herbivores of the grasslands, these tapirs played their role in the hidden, shaded realms, keeping the forests in balance. Their size made them unusual. Standing taller and weighing more than modern tapirs, they occupied an important niche as medium to large browsers in ecosystems dominated by giants. With their flexible snouts, they could strip vegetation with precision, pulling down tender branches or plucking fruit too high for smaller animals to reach. By dispersing seeds through their dung, they acted as gardeners of the forest, ensuring that plants spread and new growth flourished. The trails they created as they moved repeatedly through dense vegetation opened passages for smaller creatures, weaving them into the structure of their ecosystems in quiet, unnoticed ways. But the very forests that nurtured them were also their greatest vulnerability. The Pleistocene was a time of dramatic change, with climates swinging between colder glacial periods and warmer interglacials. As ice advanced and retreated, forests expanded and shrank like lungs, breathing with the rhythm of the earth. During cooler, drier stretches, jungles gave way to more open woodland and grasslands. For animals like giant tapirs, so dependent on humid environments and thick cover, these contractions reduced their available habitat. While many Ice Age animals were tested by shifting climates, forest specialists often faced the harshest challenges. The giant tapirs, with their heavy bodies and browsing habits, were not suited to the open plains. Unlike bison or horses that could graze vast grasslands, tapirs relied on the shelter and food of forests. As these habitats diminished, populations became more isolated and fragmented. The wide distribution of giant tapirs, stretching from Asia to South America, began to contract, leaving them vulnerable to extinction. Their decline was slow compared to sudden catastrophic losses that wiped out some other creatures. Fossils suggest that giant tapirs survived well into the late Pleistocene, only disappearing as forests shifted dramatically near the epoch's close. They were among the quieter casualties of environmental change, their disappearance tied not to a single event, but to the slow erosion of the habitats that had sustained them for millions of years. Imagining these animals alive is to picture a massive shape gliding silently between tree trunks, its moist snout reaching upward to curl around a branch, its dark hide almost vanishing in the shadows. It is to hear the soft tearing of leaves, the splash of heavy hooves in a forest river, the rustle of fruit tumbling to the ground. Though not as fierce as saber-toothed cats or as towering as mammoths, giant tapirs were powerful presences in their ecosystems, leaving subtle but lasting marks on the land they walked. Today, their smaller relatives remain, surviving in fragments of forest in Asia and the Americas. Each modern tapir carries a faint echo of its lost giant kin, reminders of an age when the forests themselves were shaped by these great browsers. Their story deepens the mystery of the Pleistocene world, a place where size and survival did not always align, and where even gentle giants could be swept away when the forests that sheltered them receded into memory. In the vast, windswept steppes of the Ice Age, there was a creature whose heavy tread shaped the land as much as the glaciers did. Herds of steppe bison once covered the grasslands of Eurasia and North America, their dark silhouettes moving like waves across the horizon. To see them gathered in their thousands would have been to witness living tides of muscle and horn sweeping across plains that stretched farther than the eye could follow. The steppe bison was immense, larger and more robust than the bison we know today. Standing nearly 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with long sweeping horns that spanned well over 6 feet, these giants carried an air of power and endurance. The horns themselves were their most striking feature, curving outward and forward in arcs that made their heads appear twice as broad. These weapons were not only for defense against predators, but also for the contest between bulls, as herds shifted and rivalries flared. In the dim light of the Ice Age steppes, those horns must have glinted like scythes above the waves of grass. Their world was defined by grasslands, endless expanses nourished by the advance and retreat of ice sheets. Cold, dry winds favored hardy grasses and sedges, plants that could endure short summers and bitter winters. For the steppe bison, this environment was ideal. Their heavy jaws and grinding teeth were built to process tough, fibrous plants. They grazed almost constantly, heads lowered, muzzles sweeping side to side as they cropped the ground clean. Where they moved, they kept meadows open, preventing shrubs and trees from reclaiming the land. In this way, they were more than just inhabitants of the steppe, they were its caretakers. The herds they formed were enormous, Fossil evidence and preserved remains hint at migrations that would have rivaled the great wildebeest herds of modern Africa, but on an even larger scale. Across Siberia, Europe, Alaska, and the Great Plains of North America, the thunder of their hooves would have echoed across valleys and prairies. Such gatherings were not only spectacles of movement, but also engines of ecology. Their grazing reshaped plant communities, their trampling broke soil for new growth, and their droppings enriched the land, recycling nutrients for the next cycle of life. Predators followed them as faithfully as shadows. Lions of the Ice Age, both cave lions in Eurasia and American lions across the plains, often preyed on them. Packs of dire wolves harried them from the edges, and saber-toothed cats lurked where rivers narrowed their movements. To survive these constant threats, steppe bison relied on strength in numbers. In a tightly packed herd, horns pointed outward and calves guarded in the center, they presented a living fortress that even the boldest predator hesitated to challenge. Yet the young, the old, and the weak always remained at risk, and the chase across the open plains was a dance as old as life itself. The presence of steppe bison was so central to Ice Age life that it left marks not only on the land, but on the minds of the people who encountered them. Deep within caves in France and Spain, paintings of bison stretch across the stone walls, drawn with ochre, charcoal, and patience. The artists captured details with striking accuracy: the curve of their horns, the humped shoulders, the sweep of their backs. Some images show them in motion, heads lowered as if charging. Others are layered, one drawn over another, perhaps marking the memory of entire herds. These images, preserved for tens of thousands of years, are among the clearest testimonies that humans and bison shared the same landscapes and that these animals stirred awe as much as dependence. Yet even animals so perfectly shaped for their world were not immune to change. As the Ice Age drew to its close, the climate warmed. The vast steppes that had stretched across continents began to fragment. Forests crept back into areas that had been dominated by grass, wetlands expanded, and the open expanses shrank. The great herds of bison, once able to roam unbroken distances, became restricted to smaller patches of land. Fewer grasses meant fewer mouths could be fed, and their numbers dwindled. The decline was gradual, but its weight was irreversible. By the end of the Pleistocene, the immense steppe bison had vanished from many of their former ranges. Some populations survived longer in isolated areas, but the age of great herds, sweeping across continents, was gone. Their smaller descendants, the bison of today, remain as reminders of their lost kin, but even these are only a shadow of the titans that once ruled the cold plains. Imagining them now is to picture a horizon alive with movement, horns glinting, shaggy coats rippling in the wind, a chorus of low grunts, and the constant sound of grazing. It is to hear the muffled thunder of hooves rolling across the earth, as if the ground itself were alive. Though their herds no longer roam, their presence lingers in fossils, in cave paintings, and in the faint echo of memory carried forward by the grasslands they helped shape. In the moving waters of Ice Age rivers, where snowmelt swelled streams into torrents and forests pressed close to the banks, there lived a fish so large and strange that it seems more like a vision from myth than an animal of flesh and bone. The saber-toothed salmon was no ordinary salmon. Stretching up to 9 feet in length, it was the largest salmonid ever to swim the waters of North America. Imagine a fish longer than most humans are tall, its body silver and powerful, cutting upstream against the current with a strength matched only by its determination to reach the places of its birth. Despite its great size, the most striking detail of the saber-toothed salmon was not its body but its teeth. Fossil skulls show a pair of long, fang-like projections that jutted from its upper jaw, curving downward like ivory daggers. These were not daggers meant to tear prey apart. Instead, they were weapons of another kind, evolved for ritual and rivalry. During spawning season, when these fish surged into rivers by the thousands, the males used their sabers in battles for dominance. Locked in contests of strength and stamina, they displayed their teeth as signals of power, pushing, twisting, and sometimes clashing in a spectacle that determined which fish would win the right to spawn. The rivers of the Pleistocene were alive with this drama. From California up into Alaska, across to Oregon, and even parts of Idaho, the saber-toothed salmon once filled waterways that are now quiet. Their migrations must have been thunderous, not with hooves like the herds of the plains, but with surges of muscle underwater, the currents alive with silver bodies pressing upstream. Birds would have shadowed them, waiting for a chance to swoop. Bears and other mammals lingered near the banks, drawn by the feast these massive fish provided. The salmon themselves, however, were not just prey. They were architects of abundance, carrying nutrients from the sea deep into the rivers and forests. Each one that swam upstream became part of a greater web of life, feeding not only their young but entire ecosystem. Unlike the salmon of today, whose teeth are small and fine, the saber-tooth's fangs marked it as something distinct, a reminder that even within familiar families of animals, evolution can take astonishing turns. The fangs may have also been used as visual signals, a way of intimidating rivals without the need for constant combat. In the shifting light of a river, a flash of saber-like teeth would have been enough to warn weaker males away, reducing the need for every encounter to end in violence. Fossil remains of these salmon are found in great numbers in ancient riverbeds and lake deposits, some so well preserved that the shape of their skulls and teeth can still be traced with precision. From these bones, scientists have reconstructed not only their size but their habits. They were built for long migrations, their bodies streamlined for endurance. Some may have traveled hundreds of miles inland, cutting through rapids and waterfalls to reach spawning grounds. To witness such a journey would have been to see persistence in its purest form, an endless push against water and time. Yet even giants of rivers can be undone by change. As the Ice Age ended and the climate warmed, the rivers that had once surged with glacial melt began to shift. Some waterways dried or shrank, others changed course entirely as ice retreated and reshaped the land. Habitats that had once supported vast migrations no longer offered the same abundance of food or spawning grounds. In time, the saber-toothed salmon disappeared. Unlike mammoths or dire wolves, whose stories are often told with drama, the vanishing of these fish was quieter, carried away on the changing tides of rivers and climates. Still, the memory of them remains etched in stone. Their teeth, so unlike those of any fish alive today, remind us of a world where evolution experimented with shapes and sizes that now feel almost unreal. The saber-toothed salmon is a reminder that rivers once held giants, that even within familiar waters there swam creatures beyond imagination, their presence shaping ecosystems in ways both subtle and profound. To think of them now is to picture a river alive with silver bodies, their sabers flashing in the current, battles playing out beneath the surface, while forests leaned over the water and predators waited at the banks. It is to imagine a time when even fish could inspire awe, not only for their size, but for the strange beauty of their design. In the icy waters of the North Pacific, where storms roll endlessly across gray seas and kelp forests sway like submerged meadows, there once lived a creature so immense and gentle that it hardly seemed real. Steller's sea cow was its name, a marine giant related to manatees and dugongs, yet so much larger that it dwarfed them, reaching lengths of nearly 30 feet. With a body as heavy as several elephants, it moved slowly through the cold shallows, grazing on kelp with quiet persistence. Its skin was dark and wrinkled, rough to the touch like wet bark. Early descriptions tell of a hide so thick that even knives struggled to pierce it. The animal's body rose like a great mound above the waterline, its head small compared to its bulk, with a mouth shaped to sheer strands of kelp. Unlike whales or seals, it had no teeth, only rough plates that ground the seaweed into pulp. Every movement was slow and deliberate, a drifting presence in the frigid waters of the Bering Sea, where the islands of Siberia met Alaska. Steller's sea cow lived where kelp grew in abundance. These underwater forests, rooted to rocks and rising like towers of green toward the sunlight, fed entire ecosystems. Fish darted among their fronds, sea otters hunted in their shade, and seabirds hovered overhead. The sea cow's immense size meant it could graze endlessly, pulling up kelp and swallowing it in vast amounts, sustaining its body through sheer volume of plant matter. To watch one feed would have been to see an underwater meadow being trimmed by a creature that seemed more like a relic from another age than a resident of the modern seas. Unlike the manatees of tropical rivers or the dugongs of warmer coasts, Steller's sea cow lived in subarctic waters, where ice rimmed the horizon and storms swept across the ocean with little warning. Here, survival required insulation. The sea cow's thick skin and layers of fat kept it warm against the cold, allowing it to drift and feed without pause. It had no real defense other than its size. It was too slow to escape predators, too gentle to fight, and relied instead on its bulk and the safety of shallow coastal waters. For thousands of years, these giants moved through the North Pacific, largely unseen, hidden in the remoteness of their world. Their populations spread across the Commander Islands, feeding in quiet herds, surfacing to breathe in great sighs that echoed across the mist. Their social lives remain a mystery, but eyewitness accounts suggest they lived in groups, staying close together, nudging one another as they grazed, their massive bodies rising and falling in rhythm with the sea. It was only in the 1700s that humans first documented them. When Russian explorers reached the Bering Sea, the naturalist Georg Wilhelm Steller described the sea cows in detail. He wrote of their size, their slow movement, and their constant grazing on kelp. His accounts astonished Europe, where such an enormous marine mammal, previously unknown, sounded almost like a legend. But discovery marked the beginning of the end. The same size and gentleness that made the sea cow remarkable also made it vulnerable. Sailors and settlers, desperate for food and resources in the harsh northern environment, hunted them relentlessly. Their meat was said to be rich and long-lasting, their fat burned well in lamps, and their hides could be used in place of wood for building or repairing boats. Within just a few decades of their discovery, the herds of sea cows were gone. By the late 1700s, less than 30 years after their first description, Steller's sea cow had vanished completely. Unlike the mammoths or giant sloths that disappeared thousands of years ago, the extinction of Steller's sea cow happened in recent memory, recorded in human history. It was not the slow shift of climate or the retreat of ice sheets that ended their reign, but the swift and relentless hand of overhunting. Their disappearance is a reminder of how fragile even the largest of creatures can be when faced with sudden change, and how quickly an entire species can be erased from the oceans. Yet their presence lingers in the stories left behind. Fossils and bones still rest on the cold seafloor, and Steller's descriptions allow us to picture them clearly. Colossal bodies drifting among the kelp, breathing in great sighs, shaping the sea meadows of the subarctic with every mouthful. They were giants of the oceans, not predators or hunters, but quiet grazers whose extinction came so suddenly that their silence still feels close, like a wave that slipped away too quickly to notice. The giants of the Ice Age were not only creatures surviving within their environments, they were forces that shaped those environments in ways we are only beginning to understand. Each colossal animal was more than just a consumer of food or a wanderer across the land. They were engineers of ecosystems, sculptors of forests and plains, makers of rivers and wetlands. When they vanished, the landscapes they had shaped for thousands of years began to change in their absence. Take the ground sloths, for example, those massive herbivores that stood taller than a man when they reared up and dragged down entire branches with claws that curved like scythes. They were not simply feeding when they pulled trees apart, they were restructuring forests. By toppling smaller trees and opening clearings, they let light fall into the undergrowth, encouraging grasses, flowers, and shrubs to thrive. Their sheer weight pressed trails into the soil, creating pathways for other creatures to follow. In places where giant sloths once moved, the entire architecture of the forest shifted with them. In the wetlands, a different kind of engineer was at work. Giant beavers, some the size of black bears, gnawed through trees with incisors as long as a man's hand. They built lodges and dams, just as modern beavers do, but on a scale almost impossible to imagine today. These enormous structures slowed rivers, spread water across the land, and turned valleys into marshes. Their ponds created habitats for fish, birds, and insects, shaping webs of life that depended on their labor. In their absence, many wetlands dried or narrowed, and the complex systems that had thrived in their pools diminished with them. The proboscideans, the great tusked elephants of the Ice Age, were perhaps the most powerful engineers of all. Mammoths and mastodons could strip bark from trees, tear down saplings, and churn up the soil as they searched for roots. By trampling woodlands into open spaces, they encouraged the spread of grasslands. Their migrations stretched across continents, scattering seeds in their dung, fertilizing the earth as they moved. The endless steppe of the mammoth's world was not only a natural biome but a landscape maintained by their constant presence. Without them, shrubs grew thicker, trees encroached on open spaces, and the great expanses of grass gave way to denser vegetation. Even animals that seemed less imposing left marks that lasted. The steppe bison, with their immense horns and grazing habits, clipped grasses short, preventing overgrowth and promoting fresh shoots. Herds numbering in the thousands stirred the soil with their hooves, aerating the ground and mixing nutrients. Their migrations carved trails that later became natural corridors for other species, and even today, some ancient routes remain etched faintly into the earth. What is striking is how much the physical world once depended on these living architects. Rivers ran differently where beavers worked, plains grew wider where mammoths passed, forests carried gaps and clearings where sloths fed. These changes were not minor, they were foundational, shaping ecosystems into the environments we now study through fossils and sediment layers. Their presence created abundance, balancing growth with disturbance, preventing stagnation by constantly stirring the living world. The loss of these giants was more than the disappearance of spectacular animals. It was the unraveling of entire processes that kept ecosystems alive and dynamic. Without the pressure of enormous herbivores, some forests grew thicker and darker, while others collapsed under unchecked changes. Without the digging, trampling, and fertilizing of great herds, soils grew poorer, less mixed, and less productive. Wetlands shrank When beaver ponds drained away, grasslands shifted toward scrub and brush. The earth itself, shaped for so long by giants, began to settle into new and different forms. Scientists studying these vanished ecosystems sometimes describe them as incomplete without the animals that built them. By piecing together pollen records, fossilized soils, and the remains of animals themselves, they see how the world functioned when the giants still moved across it. Their absence echoes not just in silence, but in the way landscapes themselves changed course, like rivers that lost their channels. The lesson they leave us with is profound. Life does not simply exist within a world, it creates the world around it. The Ice Age giants were not passive inhabitants of the Earth's stage, but active sculptors of it. In their weight, their hunger, and their migrations, they wrote the scripts of forests and grasslands, shaping patterns that outlived them for centuries. When they vanished, the stage itself began to change, and the ecosystems we know today rose in the shadows of what they left behind. The end of the Ice Age was not a single event, but a long, uneven unraveling of the cold that had held the world for millennia. For tens of thousands of years, glaciers had carved deep valleys, ground mountains into dust, and spread sheets of ice that covered entire continents. The creatures of the Pleistocene had lived within this rhythm of cold and brief warmth, adapting to its cycles. But when the final thaw began, it unfolded with a speed and intensity that reshaped the very fabric of life on Earth. The great beasts of that age were creatures of vast spaces. A mammoth needed endless stretches of grassland to graze. A giant sloth depended on sprawling forests filled with leaves and trees strong enough to support its enormous body. Herds of steppe bison required plains that stretched to the horizon. These animals were tied not just to food but to landscapes measured in thousands of miles. When those landscapes changed, their survival wavered. As the glaciers retreated, rivers shifted their courses, carving new paths into freshly exposed ground. Lakes swelled and then drained as ice dams broke. Meadows that had stretched across cold steppes gave way to forests, closing off the open pastures where mammoths and bison had thrived. In other places, deserts expanded, drying wetlands that had once supported herds of camels and beavers. Change arrived not in centuries, but sometimes in mere decades, a pace too fast for giants to adjust. Large bodies carry with them great needs. A mammoth might have consumed hundreds of pounds of vegetation in a single day. A dire wolf pack depended on prey so massive that its survival hinged on entire herds existing in abundance. Such demands meant that even small disruptions could ripple into catastrophe. If plants failed to grow one season, or if prey animals dwindled, the weight of these giants became their burden. Smaller animals could slip into new niches, eating different foods or hiding in different places. Giants could not bend so easily. Scientists studying fossil remains and ancient sediments see these transitions clearly. Pollen grains trapped in lake beds reveal the steady replacement of grasses with trees. Bones from caves and tar pits show declines in body size as populations strained against shrinking resources. Some species lingered for a time in pockets where the climate held steady, but these refuges were temporary. The broader sweep of warming left fewer and fewer spaces where giants could endure. The fragility of size is a paradox. For millions of years, being large was an advantage. Colossal bodies deterred predators, held warmth in freezing winds, and allowed animals to migrate great distances in search of food. But in a world where environments shift quickly, size becomes a trap. The very adaptations that once gave power can become the chains that pull a species toward extinction. This lesson still echoes in the present. Modern elephants, the last of the great land giants, face similar challenges. They require enormous territories, water in abundance, and food that stretches across wide ranges. As forests are cleared and grasslands fragmented, their survival hangs in delicate balance. Whales, too, though they swim the oceans rather than walk the land, depend on vast ecosystems that can falter under climate change. The shadow of the Pleistocene reminds us that no matter how strong or immense a creature may appear, it remains vulnerable to the shifting ground beneath its feet and the shifting skies above its head. The bones of the Ice Age tell us that fragility is not weakness, but inevitability when change outruns adaptation. The great beasts of the past did not vanish because they were poorly made, but because the world around them transformed too quickly for their size to follow. The silence of their herds is not only a memory of what was lost, but also a mirror, showing us how tightly life is bound to climate and how easily balance can be broken. The story of the giants of the Ice Age is not only a catalogue of strange creatures, but also a reminder of how restless and alive the earth itself is. Across millions of years, mountains have risen and worn away, seas have stretched and shrunk, forests have bloomed and faded, and with each shift, the stage of life has been rearranged. The Pleistocene was one of those stages, a chapter where cold winds sculpted continents and creatures of staggering size walked across them. But like every age before it, that chapter turned. The mammoths that once shook the ground with their footsteps are now silent. The great sloths that once pulled down trees stand only as bones in quiet halls of museums. The saber-toothed cats that once flashed their ivory blades leave us only skulls and teeth. And yet, in that silence, there is a kind of presence, as if their absence itself has weight. The real monsters of the past may not be the giants in flesh and bone, but the silence they left behind, a silence that tells us how quickly even the mightiest can be erased. The Ice Age giants shaped their worlds as much as they were shaped by them. Rivers bent around their paths, grasslands stretched wide because of their grazing, forests rose in patterns influenced by their feeding and wandering. When they vanished, the land itself changed. It is almost as though their stories are written not only in bones and fossils, but also in the very shape of our landscapes today. To look at a plain, a forest, or a river valley is to see the shadows of their presence, even if faint. It is difficult not to feel awe when imagining them, to picture a mammoth herd moving against a frozen horizon, to hear, in the mind's ear, the cries of a cave lion echoing across an icy steppe, to imagine standing at the edge of a river and watching a beaver the size of a bear hauling branches for a vast lodge. These images linger because they remind us that Earth is stranger, richer, and more changeable than we often allow ourselves to believe. Every fossil, every fragment of tusk or tooth carries a message. Some speak of abundance, of times when grass grew thick and supported herds as far as the eye could see. Others whisper of struggle, of hunger and decline, of climates shifting too quickly for giants to adapt. Together, they form a chorus of memory, echoing across thousands of years, reminding us of the fragility of life, even in its strongest forms. And still, there is wonder in knowing they were real, that these were not myths or stories imagined around ancient fires, but beings that walked the same earth we walk, under the same skies, across the same valleys and mountains. Their absence leaves space for our imagination, but their bones anchor those dreams in reality. They remind us that the distance between myth and truth is sometimes only a matter of memory. As the story of the giants closes, the stage does not fall empty. Smaller creatures flourished in their wake. Ecosystems shifted into new forms. The earth continued to turn, carrying life forward in new directions. The great lesson is that no age is forever, and no ruler of the natural world is permanent. Change is the only constant, and within it lies both loss and renewal. So now, as you sit with these images of vanished titans, let yourself wonder which one speaks to you most. Was it the quiet patience of the ground sloth, pulling down entire trees with gentle strength? Was it the spectacle of the Irish elk, carrying antlers wider than two men lying head to toe? Or perhaps the woolly mammoth, whose shaggy form still seems to walk in our imaginations more vividly than almost any other? Each of them carries a piece of Earth's story, and perhaps a piece of ours. The journey through this vanished world may be ending, but the quiet it leaves behind can stay with you. A reminder that Earth's stage is always turning, that every age has its giants, and that in time, all of them step into silence. What remains is memory, curiosity, and the landscapes that still carry their traces. If you've enjoyed wandering through this quiet story, I'd love for you to share which creature fascinated you the most. Your reflections keep this little circle of curiosity alive. And if you'd like to drift again through stories like this, gently press subscribe and join this calm space whenever you need it. Together, we can keep listening to the whispers of science even as we rest. Now let the weight of the day soften, let your thoughts drift, as the giants once drifted across plains of ice and grass. The story of the lost giants is complete, but the wonder it leaves behind can linger, carrying you into quiet dreams.